Hello, everyone. Okay, this is my first time on the back end here. So it may take me a second to figure out a couple of things. Let's see here. Here we go. This is what I'm after. All right, so we've got this. I think this is the StreamYard link for people who might be interested in joining. We'll find out soon if that works. So it is a lovely June evening here in Arkansas as we're getting close to the shortest night of the year. So we got a bunch of beautiful daylight out, and I am excited to see who wants to get on here. Got a couple of people watching. Can anyone in the chat see that might want to jump on? Can they see if that link works? I don't know if I got the right thing. No. Okay. Well, someone who can chat. Let's see here. And then I also think that I should be getting comments in through the YouTube account as well. Sorry, I'm just going to make sure that this is also working. Randos United on YouTube. Have something live on Randos. Excellent. We do. Great. Yeah. Oh, Mark. Hello. Okay, hold on. I can figure this out. Add to stream. There we go. Slowly mastering the skill set here.
Well done, sir. Well done. Yes, your link works. And
fantastic.
This is the evidence. So there you go.
Wonderful. Howdy, Mark.
Howdy.
Yeah.
Happy Father's Day.
Thank you. Yeah. It's funny, you know, my birthday's next week, so in my head, Father's Day is kind of overshadowed by my birthday, but we've wonderful, excellent. We're rolling in. Yeah, it's but now, you know, it's like 4-1 on Father's Day versus birthday, so I guess there should be more attention to Father's Day at this point. So yeah, what have you been thinking about, Mark? All kinds of things.
All kinds of things. Yeah, I've just been preparing for my Friday live stream pretty well, and what people want to hear about next, which I agree I can now do, couldn't do it before, is fantasy, right? You know, hallucination and fantasy. So I'm like, all right, well, now that we've got participation and boundaries and discernment, judgment, and action, now we can talk about the good. Like you can go one layer deeper or one layer up, or however you want to think about it.
So did you have all this mapped out ahead of time?
No. I keep trying to explain to people. First, I have to figure out what concepts nobody seems to know that I'm like, and then I have to map all those back. So this way, it's taken like 2 years. Like it's a long project. Hey, Emma.
Yeah.
Hey.
So no, I don't have it mapped out. It's not uncommon for somebody to say, I want to know more about X. And I go, I can't possibly talk about X without 7 more references.
Yeah.
You know, and it takes me a while to figure out the references again, because I don't know, you know, so I'm having this Twitter fight, roughly. It's not really a fight, but we're having this Twitter conversation with this guy, Matt Searles on Twitter. And it's mind blowing to me. He's like, well, I find X really useful. And I go, okay, well, what do you find really useful about X? And then he can't answer. And I'm like, you know, and he's using Vervaeke's framework. And he just linked me to a video between Vervaeke and Rafe Kelly. I love Rafe Kelly. I talked to him on Clubhouse. He's an interesting guy. I really like Rafe. But they're going on about, well, you see, theism is this. And atheism is this. And of course they put it in a dialectic. And I'm just like, oh my goodness, why would you do that? Because Cudworth did. And he's the guy that coined the term theist. So I like, where are you getting your stuff from? And then they say non-theism is not that. And I was like, that's not a definition. Like, what is wrong with you people?
I mean, it's like you can come over to apophatic theology land, but you know, that's like that lives next. I mean, I will assert that lives next to dogmatic theology. Like I think you have to have both like statements of it's not that, as well as statements of it is that. Like you can't live just on one side or the other, especially if you're trying to look at the whole thing. There's got to be something you don't know about, but there also has to be something you know about.
Right. Well, and that's the thing. I mean, this is what Manuel's on about. He's very articulate on this issue, far more than I am. Identification against is not identification. It's just saying you're not that. But the number of things you're not is infinite. And so you lose all possibility of identification when you're stuck in the Hegelian dialectic, which is I'm smarter than Plato and Aristotle, so I'm going to rewrite the definition of dialectic because I'm wicked smart. And in fact, you're 4 years old and kind of an intellectual retard. Then you end up with this garbage where you're like, everything has an exact opposite and you're stuck in this framing. And it's ironic. That's what they were talking about. They're saying, well, the atheists are stuck in this framing, and actually technically they're not, but that's a different story. And then non-theism isn't that. And it's like, yeah, but you didn't identify what it was, and so you don't have a ground to stand on. But imagine being in the situation like Matt is, where he's saying, I find this very useful, or I've used this, or there's something good about this. And I say, okay, what is it? And you can't identify it. Now, that doesn't mean there's nothing good about it. Okay. It could be that you know it only in your head and you can't communicate it out. And I'm not denigrating that at all. That's fine and fair. But you can't use that to cooperate with others because you can't articulate it. So now you have a different problem. I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm not saying you can't do that. I'm not saying any of that. But like, you can't put me in your frame because you can't tell me what the hell you're talking about. It's not, and it's not, again, it's not a denigration. It's just that you got to be aware of these things, man.
Yeah. That's sort of the like, I think something that I think has never been like really seriously taken up, but still does the same problem with the whole like, the whole like your truth thing that people throw around. It's like, okay, fine, maybe, but like that doesn't solve the problem of how are you and I going to live in a shared world?
Exactly.
At all. And so, Mark, I do like your point about setting up like these two things and saying, well, it's not either of those. It's like, yeah, but that possibly creates an infinite number of things because first of all, you haven't defined, you've said, you're in your set, you're saying you have a set and then it's like not that set. And it's like, how big is that space? Is there one more option? Is there a billion options? Is there actually, and so that's why like you have to, I think you really have to ground when you use that sort of apophatic speech. I don't mean this or this. It's like, you have to be really careful about what you're talking about. Yeah. Which is why, in Christian theology, that's, like Dionysius the Areopagite, it's like there's a particular place for that. And you'll notice that like, it's not church dogma. It's like, that has to do with this sort of mystical, to my understanding. Let me be very clear. I'm going to try not to speak above my pay grade. It's this thing that says, don't get too cocky about the dogma, basically. Right? That's basically what it's there for. It's not to give you like a positive idea because it's negative theology. It's like, obviously, you can't use a negative definition to provide a positive idea. All you can use it for is to say, hold that with the appropriate level of epistemological humility. That's what it's for. Yes. It's for saying, do you have enough humility regarding these statements? The right level of humility. Right.
Well, and see, that's what we've done. We've inverted first we perverted the original dialectic through Hegel. And then we inverted the Hegelian idea. And we said, instead of engendering humility, this should engender certainty and confidence. And it's like, it shouldn't.
Interesting. Did you know that, Mark, I don't know if you know this, but Peter Abelard back in the 1000s wrote a book called Sic et Non, Latin for yes and no. I don't know what to make of it, but basically he was what?
Is he the Abelard and Heloise Abelard?
Yeah. Messy guy, I'll put it that way. But his whole point was basically to say, like, look, you find these contradictory statements and things that are in the church tradition, and like we should be okay with that. And I don't really know. I think I trust him more than people who came after him, but you can really see like in that moment, there's sort of a like very conscious realization of we've got these two things that seem antithetical. Like, what do we do with those? And like that,
Mhm.
like that's a really fundamental question. I'm like kind of,
Yeah.
I'm picking up on that right now. I'm like, oh, there's not just one way to answer. What do you do with the fact that you have yes and no? You know, because there's, I mean, right, it can spool off into however many different things. It's like, you know,
Right, but it's easy. It's easy. Like this is what's like, it's like, what do you do with a contradiction or a paradox? You recognize that it is a limitation within the layer of analysis you're using, and you move up a layer or you move down a layer. One of the two. It doesn't actually matter which one you choose.
Yeah, okay.
Unless that contradiction exists in the lower layer, in which case, well, then you move up again, right? You just move.
I'll chew on that. Yeah, I mean, I like that. And then I'm just going to steal that language and to then use it in terms of theological mysteries. A theological mystery, like the incarnation or the Trinity, is a thing that you can keep on moving up the levels, and like it just keeps on affording new knowledge, and you never hit that level. You're like, oh, I get it. Right. I now understand it.
Right. But it's, you know, it's Zeno's paradox, right? What is Zeno's paradox actually telling us? Zeno's paradox is saying materialism or physical reductionism cannot work by itself. If you try to understand how you get to a wall using a quantity framework, which is material or physical reductionism, you can't get to the wall ever. You cannot touch a wall. You can't. You actually can't do it. That's pretty much what Zeno's paradox says. I know it's wicked old, and the people back then were dumb, except no, they weren't. And so what
no, they weren't.
It
they were smarter than me.
You know you can reach the wall, right? Yeah. So it tells you that the quantity, the physical reductionism, is incorrect or has a limit, and that limit is belief, which has nothing to do with measurement or quantity. It's a quality, because your beliefs have different qualities, as it turns out, and that's something you sense. It's not something you measure. It's not something you quantify, is the way to resolve that. And the interesting thing is this is absolutely reflected everywhere. So if you take martial arts, and I used to, right, they tell you rather clearly, you don't punch somebody in the face. You punch them in the back of their head, behind their face. Why? Because just doing that move in your head, for real, only in your head, results in a punch that it has much more force. When you punch past the object, you actually impart somehow magically, actually technically, by any definition, magically more force to the object you're striking. It's been measured physically with the physical reductionism, and they don't know how it works because you can't. And I don't know what else to tell you. That's the resolution. It's belief.
Mark, I will be really interested in. I got to talk with Karen Wong on Friday, and so I don't know when she'll put it up, but
awesome.
It was great. I mean, I was super happy.
He's awesome.
We had a wonderful time. It was lovely. But we kind of opened with I was talking through sort of like tail end of my college years. I was in my head, I was in this place where I understood that there's definitely an immaterial frame. There's definitely a material reality. But then I had this like really materialistic framework from my scientific education. I couldn't figure out how to integrate those. And I was like, what is it? What is it that will do that? And so I ended up actually having some very interesting sort of like anchor points along the way that got me. And then at some point it like opened way out and I could, see all this stuff. But one of the ones that was really interesting was realizing in the landscape, we look out in the world. You're in South Carolina, right? It's like probably very similar landscape to Arkansas. It's like, it's either marsh or hills, basically Arkansas. And then like lots of cow pastures and lots of row crops. And it's like, oh, that's material reality. That's real right there. It's like, yeah, but hold on a minute. If you left that cow pasture alone, it would turn into woods or briars. It turned into briars and then it turned into woods. It's like, why is there a cow pasture? Because people believe in cow pastures.
That's right.
Because they think that there should be a cow pasture there. It's like, it's really straightforwardly like now, and then they go and they have to do stuff and they have to mow it, right? And they have to spray herbicides or run cattle, whatever. They do all these things, but it's like the only reason it's a cow pasture is because people believe in cow pastures because for whatever reason, right? They might think it's good for me to make money by selling beef, and people like to eat beef for all these reasons. But you see, it's like, it's totally like, you actually can't explain even like a front yard from the material reality there. It's like, because people think a front yard is a good idea, that you're continually putting energy into this thing that naturally does not want to persist in reality.
Right.
It's like,
well, I would strenuously object to your use of the term reality. Like, there's a material aspect to reality, and there's an ethereal or non-material aspect to reality. So reality is actually one level up from our experience.
Absolutely. I was being sloppy there. Yes, that was sloppy language for sure. Yeah, it is.
I figured that's what it was.
Yes, I mean, this is the thing, right? Like, it's a real, yeah. So you can sort of see the one level in which I'm communicating a story to like the people listening to this about cow pastures and my thinking. There's another thing, which is like, as I'm doing that, I'm still in the process of like retraining my mind to think appropriately about those things and then to speak appropriately. So there's like, do I get it?
It's hard.
Sure. Yeah, I get it. But then there's like a whole nother level of actual, like, I would call that like maybe there's better terms. I call it like an operational reality. Like, it's the reality that I'm operating in. Right. And so like, can I make it so that I like really operate in that?
Right. No, that's a good way to think about it, is operational reality, right? Because you're trying it out. Because if reality pre-exists, then the world changes completely, and science is the correct answer because there's an objective material reality. But like, any 3-year-old literally understands this isn't true, because do I play with Legos or Play-Doh? And the minute you pick one's real and the other one was just an idea. Right. It's so simple, and we do this all the time, and nobody realizes it. Everyone's like, well, no, reality is different than that. And I'm like, no, it's actually no different than that. We co-manifest reality through our thoughts, which emanate down onto the material, and then things manifest. Now, sometimes that doesn't work out. That's why operational reality, because you act as if. Well, if you act as if there's more than 2 genders, for example, it doesn't work. Why? Because it scatters out across the universe, and the next thing you know, you've got 56 billion genders and counting, because you can always add one more, right? And now you and the people around you can't cooperate because you don't have a oneness that you can look up to in order to have a common point, because you can't have a common point where you're at, because we can't occupy the same space at the same time. And it's all really simple, and people like, they can't deal with it. It's so weird to me.
Yeah. So Mark, I feel like there's parts of that I definitely agree with. There's other parts I need to like work through. And I've heard like the term like co-manifesting reality. Like, that's one that I've heard. And there's like, and not just in like this little corner, which, apparently doesn't exist. I feel like I have to say that because, Father Eric.
Because it's Sunday night.
Yeah, because it's Sunday night.
On Sunday night, this little corner doesn't exist.
But there's like the Barfieldian, like Barfield also talks about like co-manifesting reality. And then there's sort of something like that. And like in Jordan Manley Hopkins' idea of the inscape, when you say that we co-manifest reality, like what are you talking? Are you talking about the movement from like things in potential to things becoming actual, something like that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, because the way people, well, and this gets tricky, right? Because it gets back to kind of the point of my channel, right? Which is, it's the way people use the terms. So the way people use reality is to talk about things manifest in the world and independently verifiable. That's how they use the term reality.
Okay.
Right. So
yeah,
that's correct. Is that they have to be independently verifiable. So they can't be, I meditated. I can't verify whether or not anybody else ever meditated. I can't even verify if I meditated. I just kind of hope that seems to be the case.
So interesting. What do you think about this then? Daniel Toma, who I really like a lot. He has a little definition of reality in his book that he doesn't really spend any time on, which is that reality is those things that we can come into relationship with. No, sorry, that are intelligible. Reality is that which is intelligible. Sorry, persons are things that can relate. Reality is that which is intelligible. What do you think about that? Is that the same thing as what you're saying, or is it different?
I mean, it's an incomplete definition of reality, but it doesn't sound wrong off the top, which is a good sign. It's always a good sign, because things that are wrong sound wrong immediately. Usually, not always, but you can kick things out pretty quickly. But I can't kick that out immediately. It sounds correct, right? Because there's still, and the thing everyone's struggling with, there's still a layer up, right? Because there's lots of things we can manifest in the world for a little while. And that seems to be related to how much time, energy, and attention they get. And so you could look at, a government that doesn't work very well, that can be instantiated for what you would think of as an awfully long time, right? Until it doesn't work anymore. And then you're like, oh, so how real is that? Well, maybe it lasted 10 years. It's 10 years real, right?
Interesting. Yeah. But I mean, the thing that immediately jumps out at me is like, and you may have, I'm sure you've got some nuances, is it basically like the observer problem. Like from what I'm hearing you say is, if you can't observe, if it's not observed, it's not real. And that's the part of that whole like co-manifestation part where I'm like, oh, hold on. Because you bump like object permanence, basically, right? You bump back into stuff. There's things that come up and you realize all of a sudden, hey, there are all these processes that no one saw going on, that all of a sudden something comes out of.
Right. Well, I wouldn't, the way I'd characterize it is that there are levels of realness, right?
Okay.
So all the things you think about, because thoughts are real in some sense, but they're not independently verifiable, right? Again, I can meditate. You can't know if I'm meditating ever. And I can't even actually know if I'm meditating, because there's only one observer and there's only one relationship. It's me with myself. And now, if that manifests in the world, and John Vervaeke talks about this, you start to meditate and maybe you won't even notice a difference, but other people will. They'll say, hey, you seem different. And you're like, oh, okay, maybe that meditation is working. But you could also meditate the Steve Jobs way, where you just become more and more of a jerk over time. So that's a thing too, right? Was he meditating? Right, because the outcome was terrible and solipsistic and narcissistic and all the rest of it, right? So, like, I don't know. Like, I don't, and was it good? No, it wasn't good, because that's observable behavior. So part of reality is your thoughts, right? But not all of reality. So if we have to if reality is co-manifested intelligibility, now we have some reasonable definition, because then you can account for the real ethereal plus the real material, and the manifestation of intelligibility is both.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah. I mean, well, and then one way to deal with that is to like look at the kinds of beings that are co-manifesting reality. You're like, well, there's also angelic beings, and then there's God. And it's like, well, no problem that there's stuff that like no human has ever seen or will, And so it is interesting. I mean, and then you look back at like the angelic hierarchies. I mean, the intelligent, they're called the heavenly intelligences, and it's like, it's just, at any rate, there's some interesting stuff there in terms of like thinking about the way that stuff had been talked about for thousands of years.
Well,
what is it that holds reality together?
But think about it this way. You can go, oh, those ethereal things that are thoughts or seem like thoughts, but aren't actually yours. Right. So there's things going on at the level of your thoughts that aren't your thoughts, nothing to do with you. Are they 100%. Real? So you might say that's an angel. Okay, fair enough. Anything that has the quality of your thoughts, but isn't within you somehow, however that is, it doesn't really matter. Right. How that can't be real. Right. It can't be real because it's ethereal only, and it can never manifest in the material. But what if an angel visits you and your life changes? And like, there might be a famous story about that.
Well,
about Ebenezer Scrooge.
Mark, that's right. Well, I could think of a
I don't
few
know.
stories like that. But Mark, I mean, that's been Pageau's line about demons for years now, right? He's like, well, you're like, well, there's no demon. It's like, point to a demon. He's like, look, I mean, it's the same pattern. It's the same immaterial pattern that didn't like wrecks people's lives in the same way over and over and over and over. And like, you can see it happening. So I don't know. I think it's, I gotta think about that. There's just a lot of latent. It's just hard to realize how much latent materialism there is in me that that I'm always trying to slay.
Right.
It's like it feels more like an exorcism than like an intellectual than like a academic exercise.
Good. No offense, but good.
Yeah. Amazing. Yeah. I don't know. It's interesting. Golly, even listening to I was on the road the other day and I listened through Pageau and Jordan Hall's conversation on AI. That was interesting. I think not more interesting for like that there's some like particularly new thing they covered, but thinking back to like 4 years ago and trying to think about someone using the kind of language that they were using. And like how comfortable they are with it now, and the 25,000 other people that listen to it on YouTube. It's like that's really something that they can talk about all of these things. They can talk about the relationship between like sin and demons and computer programs, and like everyone's totally on board with it. They're like, yeah, it's fine. We're cool with that language.
That audience.
Sure.
The smallness of the audience, I would say, is an issue, but
sure. Yeah. But like, I mean, I think about, the network effect, particularly with humans. It's like, it's pretty amazing. It's like, what's the first order effect by people who hear something? I mean, it's hopeful and also really alarming, right? Like Mark, you got like what, 1,000 subscribers. You're like, okay, yeah. But like, how many people do those 1,000 subscribers know and interact with? And to your point about like meditation, it's like you might not know if it's affecting you, but people around you are. It's really wild. I mean, so my brother and I had this great conversation yesterday, and we were talking about the fundamental unpredictability of reality. And so we're talking about things like the internet. And when the internet got invented, they're like, oh, this is what the internet is. It's a collection of computers networked together, with certain protocols. It's like, is that what the internet is? Like, is that even remotely what the internet is? No one had any idea what the internet was. And then you get to this point where we are now, and you're saying things like Pageau using that. You can see how this works on so many levels. Like Pageau is using this particular language. He's also reaching thousands of people because of the internet. And it's like, you end up, the internet is not a bunch of computers networked together. It's, Mark, to use your language, it is this crazy acceleration in the degree of dynamism of the ethereal aspect of human minds. Like that's another totally valid definition of the internet. It's like back in the 90s, no one had any idea that's where we were headed. Like how many people on the planet would have said something like that? 5 people? I don't know.
Could have been a few who knew what was going on.
Could have been a few, but like, so it's just weird. It's just weird the way those things go. You like, when something starts unfolding in the world, it's like, what is it going to mean? It's like,
well, and see, that's the problem, is the leadership gap. Like someone has to lead the change in vocabulary, lead the change in conceptualization, right? Open the space for people to interact in a new way, whether that's Jonathan Pageau or John Vervaeke or Jordan Peterson, right? And then what paths are they opening? I mean, this is, very much part of my argument on my channel with, to your point, now over 1,000 subscribers. Thank you very much, everybody. Is what did Jordan Peterson do? Like what doors did he open? And why is it that I like some of Vervaeke's framework? Well, Vervaeke has a framework. Peterson's more of just a practice. Just do this. Just clean your room, damn it, and everything will be fine, right? And look, and some of the other framings are great too. Like Graham Grizz talks about Papa Peterson and why he's the daddy that people didn't have to some extent, and that's absolutely correct, right? There's nothing wrong with that. But I'm going down a specific road because, for a specific reason, right? And a specific reason is because I'm trying to figure out how to explain to people how to make new tools to do more of what Peterson did. Right. But all of that requires leadership in the space. And Peterson's not providing it, Vervaeke's not providing it, Vanderklay's not providing it, Pageau's not providing it. Right. So that's and then what is leadership? And that's actually a video that I'm working on. I need to sit down and do serious notes on what is leadership. But I went over with Danny recently. He came to Columbia to visit me in person. But I got to sit down and like really drill in, because I think I have most of the components now. But that's the issue. Like, once you start opening up the space for egregores, which was on the STOA and other places, right? Jordan Hall talked about egregores, right? And so once you open that space up, or distributed cognition, because that was Vervaeke's term, then everything changes, right? Because now you have a new space to discuss something that's, we'll call it extra real if you're a materialist, right? Or I would just say the other aspect of reality that everybody's been ignoring because they've been materialists. Right.
Yeah. Well, Mark, have you read any of Barfield's stuff by any chance? On Barfield's
Goodness,
stuff?
No. Not a word.
Okay, so one of the things he's in his book, it's funny. I think a lot of the stuff at the time was like super groundbreaking, and now it's like, oh, okay, yeah, that makes sense. But he talks about like his 3 levels of thinking is ideation, alpha thinking, and beta thinking, and like ideation is just like you perceiving things, but he recognizes like when you see a pot in the kitchen or a car. I mean, this has all been worked over before. Like there's a process there that like in which you're interpreting the world. There's an interpretive process. Right. It's not like a machine learning thing where car has an outline around it and that's an objective fact, right? It's like you can bring a human somewhere where they don't recognize a car. Anyway, and then alpha thinking is what you would call thinking. He calls beta thinking about thinking. That's like when you step back enough in your thought to recognize that you're thinking and that there are other ways of doing it. All this discussion about things like egregores and distributed cognition and transpersonal agency and all that, I feel like that's like out beta thinking for like group dynamics. It's realizing, hey, you know how I could like step back enough from my brain to in my mind to think about how I'm thinking? There's a way in which you can step back a little bit further still and realize that like that thinking is not just level, it's going up and down, and it's being.
But are we able to do that? Like, because this is what I think everyone wrapped around their axle. They go, oh yeah, I can think about the way I'm thinking, and I'm like, no, actually, I don't think you can. I think you can observe your articulation in language, but I don't think that's your access to your thinking at all. I think that is incorrect and experimentally proven, although people never look at the data, so they don't really, or they look at the data and they look at the conclusions that people came to and not the implications of what those conclusions actually tell you, right?
So Mark, what would you say that we're doing here now then? Or like you're doing on your channel? Because I would look at what you're doing on your channel as thinking about thinking. Like what? Because I get you can't really like step back. I can't get out of myself. I get that.
When you don't have to. So here's a trick. Okay. I'm going to be totally transparent. This shouldn't be new to anybody who's ever heard me talk before. But psychology is simple. It's banal. It's uninteresting in the extreme to me. And I learned psychology through, education on public broadcasting, basically, and other things, and reading a bunch of stuff and being around a bunch of people with degrees in psychology and realizing that, a little on the below average IQ scale, in my opinion. So not the brightest bulbs on the tree for the most part, with a few exceptions, whatever. Right. But the model that like Freud and Jung use, where they've got ego and superego and id and superfragicalistic things, and right, all of that is actually very easily expressed by using a model of self and one or more mirrors that the self can then look at, right? And then, of course, the limitation of a mirror is that it can only, if you're a 3-dimensional object, right, and you're observing yourself, like I am now, I can't see my back, right? I can't see the detail of my ears correctly. Right. So there's all these angles. And so you can just use one or more mirrors and self and have a simpler, more correct model where Your ego is now a subset of yourself that yourself is perceiving in a mirror. Oh, okay. Well, that actually makes everything in psychology make a lot more sense, right? And then the idea of projection suddenly becomes really important. So what I do in my channel, and I talk about this, is it in the, I forget which video. I just recorded 2 videos recently, and it might be in one of those. I forget. And I might have said it somewhere else on my channel, but there's a big difference between your thoughts and your articulation of your thoughts. And there's a method of interpretation in there, right? So you're taking your thoughts, you're trying to interpret them, and then you're expressing those thoughts. That's definitely has to be happening. There's no way around that, right? And then there's your imprecise articulation of the thing you came up with. Because sometimes your mouth just does stupid things and you're like, what the hell, mouth? And then the other person has to hear you clearly. So there's their imperfect input from the output that you gave. And then they have to understand your articulation the way you intended it. And then they have to interpret that. See how many steps there are? There's a ton of steps. There's a ton. And so what we're doing here is, and this is where, Wittgenstein and, all these other, honestly, 3-year-old idiots have a point. Like, yeah, language is hard. And the idea of language is hard. And dealing with language is hard. But it's because of what I just said. Like, it's not even one set where there's 4 layers. It's also the 4 layers on the other side. So it's like, holy crap, there's 8 opportunities here for error. And how big and small the error is really not relevant. The fact is, that's a lot of error introduced at different layers. And different layers of errors have different effects. So I have a very good friend of mine. He has a freaking PhD from MIT. Okay. He's a former roommate of mine. In New England, we just call him wicked smart because, and bell curve means nothing to him, right? Like if you put him in a distribution, there is no longer a bell curve. Doesn't matter how many other people are on the other side. He's way out there. He has a condition that it must be a neurological condition of some kind, but he literally mishears things in exactly backwards order sometimes. And it's usually not like whole sentences, although sometimes it is, but it can just be one word and a word will get flipped and he'll go, wait a minute, did you just say blah, blah, blah? And you're like, no. And he goes, oh, because that's what I heard. But he knows he has it. So he has very good self-correction mechanisms for it. So it's very rare that he has to ask you, but sometimes he actually has to ask you and say, wait a minute, did you say this or this? And it's like, well, no, I said that. And so it's very clear to me that this happens to people. And those errors that I was just talking about input and interpretation, don't correlate to IQ. They're completely orthogonal. They're totally independent. It doesn't matter what your IQ is, right? It's the same with bias, right? Doesn't matter what your IQ is, you're still subject to the same biases that every other stupid person has, basically. They don't correlate at all. And the funny part is, we know this from the data. Like the science doesn't disagree with my statements. It's just that either no one's looking or no one's thinking about it, or you're ignoring the research. I don't know which it is. It's kind of like blaringly obvious to me. So I don't know what people are missing, but it's right there. So the question then becomes, when we're thinking we're doing something different that maybe we can't even articulate, which totally makes sense that our articulation is smaller than our ability to think. How else could it be? And therefore, the act of thinking, and this is why I said earlier, look, you may well understand an idea perfectly well enough to use it in your own life and never be able to explain it to another person. And I'm not denigrating that at all, because I know I do that all the time. There's a bunch of stuff I just know that I can tell you. I know how to do that, and I can't tell you how I know, but watch me implement. And I can just implement all day long perfectly 100% of the time. And people are just like, how do you do that? And I'm like, I don't know. You just do it. Like, I can't explain that.
So Mark, what Barfield is talking about with beta thinking is exactly what you just described, right? So that's the thing that I'm trying to get at, is like that whole arc, that whole narrative about how this thinking stuff works. He's saying to come up with an idea of that, to be aware that that is a particular way, to have knowledge of psychology, like you can, once you've done that, sort of to your point about, having opposites and the infinite space around those opposites, or apparently infinite. Once you've done that, once you've said, okay, look, I'm thinking about it this way, you realize I could be thinking about it a different way. Now, I guess my question is, do you not think that you can affect, because I'm not going to buy that I can't think about it, because I can. I've had those thoughts. Is your statement something more like that doesn't go on to then affect the way that your thinking goes? It just affects the way you articulate your thinking?
No, your articulation definitely affects your thinking. It's just that your articulation can never express it fully.
Okay.
And that's where people get wrapped around the axle.
Yeah, I'll buy that. I mean, it's funny you were mentioning this friend of yours, because like you probably, y'all haven't heard me talk enough, but like I call it synonym dyslexia. I'll do this thing where I'll like it's really bad for like proper names and titles, and I'll hear it and I'll remember it. And then someone asked me, hey Ted, what was that book you're reading? I was like, oh, The King of the Jewelry. I'm like, what do you mean The King of the Jewelry? It's like, yeah, it's like some person who's in charge who rules things of like the valuable piece of material that you put on your body. You're like, oh, The Lord of the Rings.
Nice. Oh,
and
that's
so, like,
awesome.
I've got Lord of the Rings drilled in my head enough now that I don't ever do it with that one, but like all
it's encoded.
So I do this thing where it goes down below the level of articulation to a level of meaning. And then when I want to get back to it, I can't distinguish between which of the synonyms it might have been.
Right. Well, but it doesn't.
So you don't store things in words.
No, that's right, Emma. It's really hard to store things in words for me. It's really hard to store them in words. Now, I can then pull up all sorts of different words for them. That's the thing, is that like I think most people store them not in words, but when they go back for it, they know what the word is. But like something goes wonky here, where if I don't really have it like some sort of like phonetic, some like actual sound association, then I'll just pull at any of 7 different synonyms and throw them out there and see what happens. So yeah, Emma, do you see stuff like that with your students, like the kind of thing that Mark's talking about, like these funny quirks that aren't correlating with, say, intelligence?
Occasionally I see it more with like myself, my husband, or my friends. I haven't had, because I teach like one of the big like myth classes, so I've never had like that. I don't get to know my students well enough, unfortunately, most of the time to figure that out. If I taught a Latin class, and someday I hope to, but they haven't assigned me that yet, I would probably see things like that more often, because I would have like 10 students instead of like 30.
Yeah, that's great. That's grad school life.
Wait, so your description of beta thinking, Ted, just screams to me that that's what Vervaeke's talking about when he says participatory knowledge.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's pretty interesting that you say that, because Barfield's whole thing is participation. So in Saving the Appearances, the whole arc is original participation to idolatry to final participation.
Yeah, I can't understand any of that, but participation is...
Well, so I mean, just to be clear, he thinks he identifies reductive materialism with idolatry, because you're assigning an ontology to materiality that doesn't actually exist. Yep. And so he connects that with making idols. And so then he says that the way out of that, and this is a historical progression that he's charting. He's like, the way out is what he calls final participation, which is essentially a conscious, becoming conscious of the fact that you have to have participatory knowledge of reality. Yeah. So this is why I'm like, I read this up in college. And so when I came to like all these guys, I was like, oh yeah, this kind of reminds me of Barfield a little bit. Like everyone thought I was crazy when I brought him up. So it's fun to.
Oh, no. The BOM folks have been on Barfield forever and saying, this is all just Barfield. They've been doing that for 3 years now, or at least that I know of. So yeah, that's Shari and those folks. They're big on Barfield. They came into Vervaeke server and did Barfield. So
yeah.
Should I read Barfield?
This is so funny. Last week, someone we brought up Barfield, and Shari was in the comments section, and I said that it's not a book I would necessarily recommend. And she's like, "Why would you not recommend it? Barfield's great." And I was like, "Just because, like, it's the thing about I don't know if I answered this very well that time. The reason that I wouldn't necessarily recommend Barfield. The reason I wouldn't necessarily recommend Barfield is because we'll get to that. We'll get to some singing here in a little bit.
I like the thank you at the end.
Yes. No, I thought about bringing my banjo to just like play a little bit of music if no one showed up initially.
Nice.
So maybe I'll do that next week.
You live in Arkansas and you have a banjo.
Oh my goodness. I know. It's really funny. No, what's funny though, what's really great is when I talk to people around here, they're like, you don't sound like you're from here. Are you from up north? I'm like, no. Literally my entire life. I actually joke that I'm bilingual because most of the time I talk like this, and then when I go out, I'm in the woods with a bunch of, old guys doing whatever it is that they do, working on an engine or I almost speak in another language. It's like totally, my wife makes fun of me for it. She thinks it's hilarious. If I have to answer a call from someone that I'm working for, it's like different voice. It's like, so we had in Boy Scouts, one of my favorite Scoutmasters, they have these like translator patches. If you like spoke another language, you could like translate in that language. He got one made that said he was a translator for Southern Drawl.
What are y'all talking about with Southern Drawl? It's just
exactly. But somebody's, I can't do it on command. I can't do it on command. If you put me with people like that, I can. It's like without even thinking.
All right, in.
I'll pick up my Nana's Rhode Island accent in a similar way.
Yeah,
I can't do like Lowell on command, but when I talk to my uncle, and it's residual. So after I talk to my uncle, who's it's wicked Lowell accent, it lasts for a little while, and people are like, "What the hell?" And I'm like, and I can't turn that on and off. I cannot. I have no access to it. It's so weird. But it's usually like Southern, I can. Yeah, I could do a few of those.
There's a lot to be pondered there. Sorry, Emma, to go way back to your question. I just think that there's some things that I disagree with on Barfield that are very subtle, and that because I'm a Catholic, like I find it more important that I find it very important that people not be tripped up on those like pretty subtle errors, because I think it can lead them down some wrong paths. And so that's
fair. I was curious whether this was a like wouldn't necessarily, but depending on the person, or just wouldn't necessarily, you can't
just depending on the person, and like, am I sending you off into the wild with Barfield, or is it something that like you and I are going to have conversations about? Like, there's just all sorts of like, there's all sorts of people out there that have like some really great insights that aren't necessary. As my wife likes to say, you should always tell the truth, but not all truth is for all the time.
Right.
That's like what I was talking about with Jacob Friday morning about Newman and how that works. Because Newman has a similar quote. Yeah, John Henry.
What does he say?
I can't find the actual quote. But it's sort of answering a charge of being told that like he lies to people, and he's like, no, I just don't always explain things like entirely all the time. And sometimes that definitely looks like lying, yes.
Yeah, well, he was a Jesuit, so like everyone was going to accuse him of lying anyway, right?
How did I not know that?
He was a Jesuit, right? Yeah.
I don't know.
Maybe it wasn't Hopkins. Father Hopkins was a Jesuit.
Hopkins was a Jesuit.
Yeah, and then
I think Newman was just diocesan.
I'll see. I'm about to use my meta brain. John Henry Newman, English cleric and cardinal. He let's see here. Cardinal at university, Anglican ministry, Oxford movement, Protestant oppositions, conversion to Catholicism. Yeah, I think you're right. I don't think he became a Jesuit. Nope.
Hopkins
you're right.
Definitely was though. I need to finish Hopkins poetry. Like actually read poetry.
Oh my goodness. We could have a
When I was in undergrad, my roommate and one of my other friends took a class where they had to memorize like a poem a week, and the teacher usually picked a Hopkins poem. So I had it like written in the wall of my shower, like a new one every week for a semester. And I picked up like bits and pieces, but I never like properly memorized them.
That's fantastic. Yeah, that was the first poem I ever memorized was a Hopkins poem. They're very memorizable. I actually really like his The Wreck of the Deutschland, which is someone once described, because it gets put at the beginning. It's way longer than all the rest of his. Mark, you'd probably appreciate this. I read a commentator once described it as the dragon that guards the gold that's the rest of his poetry. All these people pick it up and they'll get like 6 stanzas into The Wreck of the Deutschland. They'll be like, I don't really know what I'm doing with this, and then put it away. It's like, no, if you just got through into like, all this other stuff. I mean, there's a lot of reasons he's interesting. One of the reasons, though, that he's interesting is he was like, with his poetry, he was actually trying to imitate the process of insight, or the experience of insight. So he wrote it in such a way that it was immediately like orally appealing, like you liked the sound of it, but you didn't understand. But it was meaningful, which meant that you could read through it and you're like, oh, I like that. I'm going to read through it again. And then like the third or the fourth or the fifth time, all of a sudden it would go, and you get everything that he was saying all at once. Not everything, but you would get what's going on. And he's like, that's how reality is. I want to write poetry that when you read it, you're feeling the same thing that you do when you're out actually like trying to get a hold of things.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
That actually does bring up to your earlier question what I've been thinking about. So there are two big whopper things. I don't want to talk about one of them because it's too new in my brain, but one of them was about music. And I was like, wait a minute, if my thesis is correct about story is to narrative as music is to narrative, then what you're doing with music, we'll say with lyrics, is you're doubling down on the enchantment.
Okay.
And so you're overwhelming other systems by using, we'll say that the musical enchantment plus the lyrical enchantment combined, right? Yeah. And so people have no interest in going to hear a Gregorian chant at a church. Right. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Even though like that experience, and look, like I listened to, you know, it's not really a band, it's a guy, but Enigma, the first Enigma album, he does that. He's got Gregorian chant in there and a bunch of, it's a wonderful album. I love it. I once listened to it earlier today, in fact. But he's got some Gregorian chant. He's got a song called Mea Culpa, right? I mean, it's good stuff. It's really his first, the subsequent albums I'm not a super huge fan of, but his first album was great. But listening to Gregorian chant outside of the church is still really cool for me. Like it's like, oh wow, that's pretty neat, right? But when you go and chant in person, say like in an ashram, that's still my biggest experience is still chanting in the ashram. Like that was still like huge for me. I was like, what the hell is this? Like this is amazing, right? But going to a church and doing it is much richer. But look, there's Taylor Swift, man. You know, it's pretty good. It's quick. It's accessible. I don't need to go into it. You know what I mean? And it's, I'm not trying to equate the two things, but I am saying, you know, there's the quality is subsequently different, but it's close enough that the extra work to go to church and to hear this stuff is, you know, like, really, do I need to? Because it's right there. I can just, you know, and that's working with so many things with technology, right? There's all kinds of enchantment running around that we don't need to that we don't need to bother with, right? Like, oh, you just turn on the TV and get a hit of whatever, right? Or you just turn on the radio and get a hit of whatever or whatever, right? It's not, you know, there's no reason to leave the house in some sense, not for that, but you got to get groceries. Well, but other than that, you're fine.
So Mark, I've got
you can have those delivered.
Yes. Yeah. Well, no, I mean, there's some interesting stuff in there. So one of the things is a friend of mine who's also, you know, goes to traditional mass. We're talking about Gregorian chant, and he was making the distinction between, and intellective versus appetitive music. So he said Gregorian chant is ordered towards the intellect, whereas like most modern music is oriented towards your appetites, right? So it's like,
yes,
you can see it all the way down to the level of the rhythm. It's like matching like the way that
feel the passion.
Yeah. And so there is this sense in which that is like, it's just easier to understand in the same way that, say, like eating a piece of bread is easier than reading a book, right? Like there's
Yes.
there's a degree of bodily engagement with something like with Taylor Swift music. Like they're just like, I'll just admit, like
it's satiation. And
yes.
Right. But you're satiating different things, but satiation is an abstraction that matters, right? Because, well, and this happens to me all the time, like literally all the time, right? I run into a situation where I'm like, I've got some, we'll say some energy to burn or something, right? And then the question is, do I burn that energy coding, or do I burn that energy running, or do I burn that energy listening to music, right? Because there's all these ways of engagement, and they're qualitatively different, right?
Yes, they're qualitatively different.
And the only thing that needs to be satiated is the using of that extra energy.
Wait, sorry, I may have missed something. I don't. You don't think that there's? Are you saying that's what other people say? Or are you saying, because I think there's all kinds of different like degrees of satiation.
No, there's tons of satiation types.
Okay, right? Great. I was like, hold on a minute.
No. All I'm saying is that you can, there is a swappability. Well, like, look, a lot of times people can go, oh, I'm hungry, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to drink something and go back to work, and that works.
Yes. Well,
I mean,
that immediately. I mean, what that makes me think of immediately is like that definition of simulacra that was floating around. It's like a thing that has all the salient features, but isn't the thing, right? I'll be like, a lot of modern music is like, I would call it much more like a simulacra of music, right? Because it does the things to you on some level that music is supposed to do, but it's like, it's clearly not the same thing. For one way you can tell it's not the same thing is you can be outside of a car where someone's playing that kind of music, where all you're getting is the bass. You're not getting the music, you're just getting the bass, and it does the same thing to you. Right. It's like, is that music? If I just heard the bass notes of like Beethoven's Fifth, wouldn't be the same thing. But like that same, like, I don't have to hear it's like, again, like I don't have to hear the lyrics of those songs.
Well,
you just have to hear the way this.
But think about this, Ted. What if when we're flattening the world, we're flattening out the music too? And so we don't even notice initially that there's a difference between going to church and listening to a Gregorian chant, which might be a pain in the neck, right? I mean, for me, the Orthodox church is across town, man. I mean, there's a Greek Orthodox church I haven't been to that's a little bit closer, but either way, it's like half an hour in the car for sure, right? Each way. So there's a lot more effort that has to go into that, than just like, I was just listening to music. I just had it on. And then your voice came and ruined it, by the way. I was like, what's going on? Oh, okay.
I wanted to throw this up because when we started going to the traditional mass and we sing in the choir there, I like, without even meaning to, the amount of music that I listened to dropped 95%. I mean, it was bizarre. I realized like a month later, I was like, oh, that's weird. I didn't mean to do that. I didn't think, I need to like cut this godless stuff out of my life at all. It was just like, I just wasn't like, well, it's like, it's like some, I need to eat. Yeah.
You were
I need to eat. Or I could take a drink and I could get back to work. I mean, it's the same thing. And I think asceticism, properly understood as spiritual training, is really doing this all the time. It's saying, you think you need all these things, but actually you don't. What you need is this thing. And so we're going to do a little bit of deprivation down here on all sorts of levels. We're going to do some reorientation down here to get you realizing that thing you're looking for is up above all of that stuff. That'd be one way of looking at it. Obviously, asceticism's got more to it than that.
Yeah, but I think like this is the deep point and problem of the modern error, as I like to call it, is that what we're effectively doing is we're saying what you should be going for is happiness. And no, what you should be going towards is satiety or contentedness. And if you can reach that level, then you should have some gratitude, right? And then anything extra is extra. And that's how you re-enchant the world.
So the thing that immediately strikes me about that.
Where does that last bit quite come from? That's how you re-enchant the world.
For yourself, like the world's already enchanted, like everybody gets mixed up. Yeah, the world's already enchanted. I get that. But you re-enchant the world for yourself, right? Because you re-inflate the world. It's no longer compressed or flattened or
Can I ask a troublemaker question?
Sure.
How is that different from the TikTok and Tumblr girlies romanticizing their lives?
It's not different in that it's an attempt to do the same thing. It is different in that the quality of that attempt and where it's constrained, right? So what you're trying to do with romanticism in general, or romance in general, is you're trying to make these connections one layer up. Some people use the word meta for that, which drives me nuts. So I try not to use that term anymore, right? So you're trying to connect. You're trying to do the universal history trick that Jonathan Pageau does, right? You're trying to connect your simple experience, right, to something bigger so that you can express the quality that you already feel, that's already there, that you already sense.
Okay.
Hello, Jonathan. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Jonathan.
Well, good to see you all on a Sunday night. Sam's father, Eric.
Yeah.
I'm a poor replacement.
We'll carry the torch. No. You're a great replacement. I was just I think you and Emma both had some PVK rando chats drop recently, and it's good to hang out with you. Mark, of course.
Ted, I've listened to yours twice because I wanted to show it to Colin.
It was good.
So it was good, but
good, yeah.
I wanted to show it to Colin, so I listened to it again on the drive up to Chicago today.
So when I first saw Paul at Chino, I was like, how weird is it to be around 100 people that can all just quote you to yourself? He paused for a second. He was like, it's really weird. And I was like, and then it just occurs to me now. I'm like, oh, I'm like headed in the direction where someone's gonna be like, Ted, you remember that time, a month ago when you said X? I'm gonna be like, I guess I'm gonna just have to trust you on that.
Oh yeah, I went back and watched the Theology of Go Dog Go open mic one time, like a little bit ago.
Oh, that was you, Ted? You were the Go Dogs Go guy?
Yeah.
Yeah, that was right on. We own that book. I read that book as a child. It's great.
I feel robbed. I've never had the full version. I've never seen the full version before.
Oh, did you have one of the like stupid abridged ones that don't make any sense?
We had an abridged board book version, and I thought that's all there was of it. I never knew there was more to Go Dogs Go. Like, even before you add in all the like theology stuff, I just didn't know about the full version.
At the end, they leave the party and fornicate. That's like how the book culminates. Is like he finally likes her party hat, and they go off and do their thing.
Dude, it's got to be outside of marriage for it to be fornication. It's totally Adam and Eve. It's much more like the end of That Hideous Strength when all the animals are procreating under the influence of the celestial Venus.
All right. I like it. Keep it grounded.
Trying to, Oh man, no, but Jonathan, that's funny, man, because I remember growing up and being totally mesmerized by that book, and I never knew why. I never, and then my kids, they immediately latched onto it, and it was like, what is it about this book that like?
I mean, the artwork is really good. They kind of just like, I don't know, like the scenes that they do, like the party boat and like the house with the dog on the roof, and he's like hot, and the dog in the shade. It's like, there's something very.
That soda, the dog under the house with a soda. Like, I wanted that soda. That was a good looking soda right there.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness, Andrew and his quirky dog.
Yeah, that's Go Dogs Go for you.
That dog is going to the tree.
So now we have some Catholic representation going on here.
That's
Yeah.
what Sunday nights are for.
Right.
We're all powered up from mass, so ready to get Sunday morning mass. Oh my goodness. Yeah, John.
Did
sorry.
you hear Vanderklay talk about that? He's like, Father Eric, how do you do it? I'm so tired after and I'm like, really? After you guys don't even do any work, but maybe it's because they kind of do, like, one person does all the work, right? Instead of a big Catholic church where there's a bunch of people involved, and so you're more energized than drained.
I do feel like being a pastor is more like performing than being a priest is.
Yes. Yeah.
You said it, not me. I'm going to agree with you, but just say, damn it, said it, not me. I just agreed.
So I mean, Mark, I've done a little bit of like.
Listen, I'm here to Catholic opinions. I think that's my whole thing. I'm surprised Orthodox haven't shown up to fight me yet after my Randos convo where I called them very high church Protestants.
Well, Andrew's doing his training montage right now. Look at him; he's in his hoodie. He's getting ready.
That's true.
It's like.
It's like the cutscene from Punch Out. He's like jogging there with his dog.
Andrew looks like he's in his montage from like Rocky 15 or something.
I don't feel like we have a lot of ortho bros who are ready to fight in the corner.
They were all
not on the YouTube part of it.
They were all so nice at Chino. I loved all the ortho bros I met. They were like really sweet people. Mark, to your point, I was gonna say, just like my little experience serving at the altar, is that like once I got the hang of what was going on, it like really carries you, and this is coming from someone who also was a Protestant preacher, and like I get buzzed from preaching. Like it's like I'm real pumped, but then you come way down. It's completely different from being involved in liturgy. Completely different.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Oh, that fits our model. Thank you, Ted. More confirmation for the excellent model. That's great.
Am I gonna get it? Do you need me to do a citation for you? No, I mean
yes.
It really is. It really it's really true. There's a degree. I mean, of course, it's never that simple, right? So like
right.
When you're involved in like as a laity involved in liturgy, there's a degree of like concentrating your attention. Like that's where you're going. Like you're concentrating your attention on what's going on. You're trying, because not the whole point. One of the main points is you're trying to orient yourself towards God. And so the Mass is this process in which you get to do that in a participatory manner, particularly with like the dog, transubstantiation. You've got God has made himself present in the host, and it's like everything's pointing at that. And so you're like, I have to pay attention. And so it's sort of like, in that sense, there's some effort involved. On the other hand, like once you start to like have like an intuitive participatory sense for the Mass, it's way different. You're not like, I'm trying to figure out what's going on. You're like, now it's this thing. Now it's this thing. Like now we're, and it starts to, I mean, I imagine that it's somewhat like someone who's got like a crazy juggling routine, like really down. You look at them and you think, how are they doing that? Isn't that exhausting? It's like, no, they could do it with their eyes closed because they've just like drilled and drilled and drilled. And so obviously the spiritual danger of that is to stop paying attention, right? That's the spiritual danger to liturgy, is to stop paying attention because you know what it is. And I think the response, the fear of liturgy is that it's like a natural human tendency to lose the novelty aspect, right? I'm not being drawn by novelty. If I'm not being drawn by novelty, what's going to draw me? It's like, well, all sorts of things have to, because if you get pulled around by the leash of novelty, like Andrew's being pulled around by his corgi, like you're going to have a terrible life. Like it's just guaranteed.
Right.
Novelty will lead you bad places. You have to be pulled by something else. And so this is why, like, this is sort of one of the reasons I think that like we have to be comfortable with liturgy, is because that's actually all of life. My brother, I remember being a young man in college, and my older brother, he's 2 years older than me. At one point we were talking, he just said, all you have is the everyday. In the end, like, because you could have the most exciting life, and the most exciting life will become every day. And so it's like, the way that you come to terms with the everyday is the way that you're going to come to terms with your entire life. And I think liturgy is the spiritual outworking of that principle. Exactly.
Well, Peterson actually kind of makes that point, right? He does talk about that quite a bit. Like, the things you do every day are the things you do the most, right? Like, and so these other things are, different. And yeah, I think you're right. But also, you know, when you're say engaged in a liturgical experience, you're being drawn along, you know, and up, right? Whereas if you're, you know, dependent upon novelty, and the other side of that is nostalgia, and the other piece of that, because nothing's a binary, there aren't two anything, right? Is mindfulness, right? The here and now, right? So there's three. There's definitely three there's there. The problem becomes that's the flat world. That's the reduced world, right? If it's just novelty, nostalgia, and what's here and now, that's all you got. Like that's kind of flat, and you can't cooperate on that basis because what's novel to you is not novel to other people, and what's nostalgic for you is not necessarily nostalgic for others, and so that causes that chaotic splintering again. And so you have to have that higher thing with the higher goal, right, and higher ideals to look towards in order to keep things together. And when you lose those higher ideals, like the CRC is, right, then everything splinters apart. It's like, oh no, we can't agree on the definition of marriage. And it's like, well, yeah, but marriage is a higher thing. So if you can't agree on that, you're just going to splinter apart again. And that's, of course, what's actually happening, which is sort of unfortunate for them, I guess, but also inevitable because Protestantism. So I don't know what to tell you guys. Like, you did it to yourselves. Good job.
Oh man, I'm not gonna say anything. Yeah, that's an interesting. Golly, yeah, Mark, that just reminds me of a while back, some quote from Richard Dawkins where he was talking about, you know, he's like, basically like, I'm tired of everyone complaining about how, you know, apparently you don't know what to do if you're an atheist and, you know, life is devoid of meaning. He's like, I have my lunch in front of me. This is a delicious lunch. I'm really enjoying it. Which is the mindfulness move, right? He's saying like, I'm appreciating this thing that's in front of me. And you're like, and yet like almost every sane person will look at that and be like, that's actually not an answer. Like,
exactly.
That's actually not an answer, because if you've just like, if you're living in one of those three.
That's the horizontal. Like that's any horizontal line through time. Any horizontal line through time is exactly that outline and nothing more.
Okay, so there's a podcast that I love called Sacred and Profane Love. There's this Catholic professor that she talks with all sorts of people. They get to bring their like favorite work of literature they want to discuss. So it's crazy stuff, a bunch of stuff that I've never like. Sometimes I wouldn't touch with like a 10-foot pole. The one on hello Jacob. The one on the Scarlet Letter was fascinating, but she did a 3-part series on St. Augustine's Confessions, which I haven't read. And I did not realize that St. Augustine was like totally obsessed with time and memory.
You guys talk about bullshit way too much.
Yeah.
Look at that.
Some people
Look at that baby.
are not asking stupid questions. Do you know what that reference is to?
Yes, you showed me that when I was at your apartment, Jacob. Yes.
You guys talk about a lot. Like I'm sitting here listening, and I look at that picture, and I'm like, hey, you guys talk a lot of just yap.
Of course, when we start talking about St. Augustine.
Yeah, that's Jacob's had enough. Jacob's had enough when we get to St. Augustine.
Jacob, you're looking snazzy.
Should I pull up the video of stupid questions?
That's actually honestly, in honor of Father's Day, Jacob, you totally should. That's a
Oh,
great.
is it Father's
What's
Day?
the video? Stupid questions. It is
It
Father's
is a
Day.
perfectly great video for Father's Day. Yes. Yeah.
Where is my stupid questions video? Stupid questions. Stupid questions.
There are no stupid questions, only stupid people.
Or
Homer Simpson told me so.
there are stupid times to ask questions. That's the point.
Look how Christian your YouTube is.
There you go.
I know, that's what I was just noticing.
And if someone comes along and asks you an existential question about your commitment to that, the right response is, why are you asking me such stupid questions when this is manifesting itself right in front of your eyes? Like, how blind can you be? Well, and if someone comes along and asks you an existential
So to set this up, this is the last 5 minutes of Peterson's 2017 Maps of Meaning thing, where he spent like all of a whole semester like telling people to like all these philosophical, existential, like meaning stuff. And you have to like spend a whole college semester being Jordan Peterson, talking about all this stuff in order to finish with this thing of saying, why are you asking me stupid questions? So here we go.
Do none of those. They're real reasons. So it's really a decision. But you can't find out what the consequence of the decision is unless you make the decision. I think the same thing happens when you get married, by the way. Is that if you think you might leave, you're not married. And then you think, well, the marriage didn't succeed. It's like, well, maybe you were never married. Because the rule is you don't get to leave. And there's a reason for that rule. Now, I'm not saying that there aren't situations where there should be exceptions made for that. That's not the point. The point is that there's some games you don't get to play unless you're all in. And the other thing that's so interesting about being alive is that you're all in. No matter what you do, you're all in. This is going to kill you. So I think you might as well play the most magnificent game you can while you're waiting. Because do you have anything better to do? Really? Why not pick the best thing possible that you could do? Why not do that? Maybe you could justify your wretched existence to yourself that way. I think you could. That's what it looks like. You know, people find such meaning in the responsibilities they adopt. It stops making them ask questions about what life is for. If you have a newborn child, for example, like unless you're really in a bad way, psychotically depressed, or maybe your personality really needs some retooling, you stop thinking about anything but ensuring that that baby is doing well. And if someone comes along and asks you an existential question about your commitment to that, the right response is, why are you asking me such stupid questions when this is manifesting itself right in front of your eyes? Like, how blind can you be? That isn't a time for questions about the meaning of life. The answer is right in front of you. And if you can't see it, it's not because life has no meaning, it's because you're blind. I mean, that's what the image of the Virgin Mother and the child is all about. It's like, what's the answer to the meaning of life? Here's an answer. It's like, well, I'm going to criticize that. Well, go right ahead. You know, it's like what you're like a what do you call that? A termite gnawing on a temple. There's no utility in that sort of criticism.
Right.
It's blindness. And it's the same thing with regards to the path of the hero. It's like it glistens in front of you and you can criticize it. It's like, fine. Put the cart before the horse and see how far you get. So I thought, to bring full closure to the class, I was trying to solve this terrible puzzle that confronted me and many other people about how it was that human beings got themselves in such a tangle about what they believed. Such a tangle that we were pointing the ultimate weapons of destruction at one another, which, by the way, we are still doing. And I thought, okay, well, I understand that. We need our belief systems. They orient us. And that means there will be conflict between belief systems, and that can be a catastrophe. And that's being played out everywhere, again, in very many ways. What's the solution to that? Well, one possibility is there's no solution. It's just mayhem all the way around. Could be the case. But it seemed to me, as I delved into it, that the proper solution to that was to live properly as an individual, because you're more powerful than you think. Way more powerful than you think. I mean, God only knows what you are in the final analysis. You're blind to your own weaknesses, but you're also blind to your own strengths. And so then I think, well, if you got your act together, it'd be better for you, and instantly it would be better for your family, assuming they wanted you to get your act together, and not everyone does, and then it would be better for the community. It's like, how far could you take that? If you stopped wasting time, and if you stopped lying, and if you oriented yourself to the highest possible good that you could conceive of, and you committed to that, how much good could you do? Well, I would say Why don't you find out? So that's what I think you should do. You should find out. You don't have anything better to do. And there's nothing in it, as far as I've been able to tell, there's nothing in it but good. So maybe you could sort yourself out so that you wanted nothing but the good. And then maybe you could help make that manifest in the world. And maybe we wouldn't have all these terrible problems then. At least we'd have fewer of them, and that would be a start. So it's the answer to the problem of humanity is the integrity of the individual. That's the answer. So, and states that are predicated on that realization are healthy. So, and states that aren't are doomed to stagnation and catastrophic collapse. And personalities that are predicated on self-tyranny and the tyranny of others are doomed to collapse. So, and then you think, well, what's the barrier? And the barrier is, are you willing to accept the responsibility? And part of the answer to that is reduce the damn responsibility until it's tolerable. You don't have to fix everything at once. You could just start by fixing the things that you could fix. Or you could even do it more. You could do it with even less self-sacrifice. You could start by fixing only the things that you want to fix. God, you can get a massive way that way. So do it. See what happens. That's what you should have been taught in university right from the beginning. It's like, aim at the highest good. Tool yourself into something that can attain it. And go out there and manifest it in the world. And everything that comes your way will be a blessing. And so all you have to do is give up your resentment and your hatred. I know that's a hard thing to give up because you have plenty of reason for it. That's probably a good place to stop. So it was a pleasure.
Hey, you ever seen a wealthy person or a wealthy family or a jet owner? Like,
the internet strikes back there at the end.
Yeah, I actually thought when you switch to this view, the sound stops, but I guess not.
Apparently.
Yeah, Jordan Peterson's one of the best preachers that's been alive in the last 100 years.
Yeah. And you got most of that right, except the individualism. But yeah. It was
Not just like on a what do they call it, hermeneutics? Like
Well, he said the integrity of the individual, and I think what you have to understand is that an integral universe. I mean, this goes back to Jacob's greatest hits of you're not an individual until you're married. An individual is a male, female, human. That's like that is actually the lowest. That is the smallest unit of human life.
Yeah.
Is a married couple.
So what's a single person?
Half a human being.
So you disenfranchised half the people according to Peterson's outline, which is exactly
No. According to me, this is like this is from
well,
the
that's
code of
fine,
Jewish
Jacob.
law.
No,
The code of Jewish law, like an unmarried
that's fine,
person
but
is
then-
not considered a human being.
But then
People lost their
Peterson's
minds
wrong.
when I said that.
But then
Well,
Peterson's
maybe-
wrong, which is also fine because that's
I
what I said.
okay. I have no problem with Peterson being wrong.
Right.
Jacob,
That-
this is how
that
you
was the
get
wrong
the
part.
whole there is no distinction between male and female, if they don't exist by themselves, blah blah blah,
What do you mean? There's no distinction?
Okay, if you can't
Meet a girl, you'll see she's different from you.
Yes, I understand, but you're saying that individuals only exist in marriage or some shit like
Yep.
that, right? Yeah.
That's why. Do you know what is necessary in order for this to happen?
Has anyone told Andrew how babies are made?
Good job. Nice insult, Jacob. That's good.
Amazing.
So is that today? Did Antonio have a baby?
Yeah. Yes, Antonio had a baby. That
On
is
Father's
today.
Day. That's so fun.
Right?
Yeah.
Mazel tov.
His son's birthday is Father's Day.
We
Well,
thought that-
only once every 7 years.
Right.
Oh. Okay.
we thought that we were gonna have our first son on Father's Day, and he missed it, and he was born on my birthday instead, which I'll take.
It's tomorrow.
22nd. Yeah, this week. Yeah, so
Nice.
it's pretty fun. Yeah, we're
Happy birthday.
yeah.
June's a good month. This is a good week. It's my
Yeah.
anniversary.
Wow.
Yeah, a lot of people get married. So at synagogue, they have,
Yeah, June is pretty to get married in.
Okay.
Also, all my
And
friends
June.
were teachers.
So-
Are
Not in
teachers.
Arkansas.
last week they had two couples, and I forget the exact number of years, but the first one, like, they had a celebration of their anniversary, and I think the first one said they were 63 years, and the other one was
Oh,
like,
wow.
"We have you beat, 67." It's like,
Wow.
All in.
Yeah.
I've got two.
It's weird how yeah, Emma, just blink and it'll be it's really wild. That
Yeah, I bet.
Peterson, here's what's so interesting to me about Peterson is like he's so compelling in that. Like he is so compelling. I feel like he's less compelling now.
Yeah, I like young Peterson better.
Yeah.
And I just why didn't it get more compelling? Like that's kind of scary on some level, you know?
That it's possible to get less compelling as you get older.
No. What did
sold
John
out.
Vervaeke say about getting old at Chino? It was like, imagine yourself. He's like, when you're older, you're you, but like sicker and uglier or something, and like figure out what you're gonna do about that. I don't know. It's a weird thing about. Yeah, we have.
I remember.
My wife and I were talking about this, and we're like, it's just really emblematic of our view of old age in this society. There's a quote from Dante, and I think the Vita Nuova, where he's talking about like the stages of life, because he was a Renaissance, and so you make diagrams of everything. So he's like, here's the 9 or 7 stages of people's lives or whatever. But anyway, the second to last one, he's like he said that a person of that stage should have many good and beautiful things to tell for their long life. And I was thinking about that. I've been thinking about that for years. I was like, that's not how like old people think about themselves now. Right, much less young people looking at old people, but like even the elderly don't look at themselves and think like, I have a lot of good things to say because I've been alive for a long time.
That's because we have a very stupid culture.
I agree, Jacob.
I will never forget. Jonathan Haidt came to speak on a campus, and because they had to balance him out with a woke person, some psychology undergrad, right, was on stage with him, disagreeing with him. And it was like he would say something and she would say, I disagree. It would be like, okay, preeminent scientist, one PhD, professor of psychology, and an undergrad sitting there disagreeing when he says something is a scientific fact. Like, that college needs to be burnt down to the ground.
Yeah. But that was Peterson's point. Like, who are you to criticize? Right? It's very anti-postmodern, because postmoderns say you're a valid critiquer of any random thing, which cannot be true.
It's even
right?
beyond that. Like, she wasn't even criticizing. She said, I disagree.
Yeah, but no, Jacob. All criticism is the function of a 3-year-old, and it is nothing more. And that's what people need to recognize. Like, you just ask why forever to every answer, and you are as good as Foucault and Derrida, and they are no better. And
Well,
that's what people
they're-
need to realize.
Yeah, but these woke people are worse because it's one thing to ask why. It's another thing to say, "Nuh-uh, that's a 2-year-old." Nuh-uh.
I don't know. I was doing that when I was 7 still. But see, that's the thing. Critique is not constrained to a form. And that's the problem. Like there's all kinds of ways to critique things. And one of them is just to deny, that anything was valid, right? And that's what they end up doing. And that's why I like the end of that. The Peterson basically says, who the hell are you to critique? Which is very anti-postmodern, which I think is
You're a termite gnawing on a marble temple. I wish he had said marble temple because too many people think of it wood temple, and it's like
Wood
no,
temple?
it's not even wood. It's
You're not even hurting
possibility.
it.
You're just getting saliva on it and doing nothing else.
Yes.
That reminds me of the little bit of Wolfgang Smith that I listened to on Karen's podcast, where he's like, the first time I heard it, I thought it was a really weird move, but he's like, yeah, I think the main problem is a lack of respect. It's like, hold on, what are we talking about? Like relativism, and then you're bringing in respect. And I've thought about that a lot more. I'm like, no, yeah, he's actually really got something there. And
Because
Daniel,
respect is a form of grounding, right? Respect is a form of grounding.
It teaches you. It's even more than, and Daniel Toma talks about a kind of respect for nature too. He's like, try splitting oak logs without a hydraulic splitter, and you like have respect for oak. Not the same kind of respect as for like a professor or a venerable, say your venerable grandfather, but like there's respect there, and it's that respect is almost like it's just like a recognition outside of things outside of yourself. Respect is basically just like antithetical to pride. Like it's just a recognition of like existence outside of you. And then
respect is the door open for humility.
It is, but it's not. It's even more than that because it's also justice. Because especially when you respect a person, you're not just recognizing that they exist. You're recognizing respect, not in the sense of like respect everyone. Respect in the sense of, say, Jonathan Haidt deserves my intellectual respect on some level.
Respect judges you because you have to wonder: am I being respectful, and am I being respectable?
Yes. Yeah.
And that's why Protestants are so opposed to people wearing good clothes to go to church.
Ooh.
Yeah. Can confirm.
Because they don't like the judgment part?
Yep.
It judges you. Like when you dress up, it judges you. Because
Well, and that's what everybody tells you when you like dare to say that people should dress up for church too. They tell you to stop judging people, and some people are poor.
Yep. So you reduce it's like Marxism. You reduce everyone to the poorest possible state, right? There are no priests, there are no bishops, there's nobody worthy of being raised up, right? And that's when you end up with something like synod.
And then you get equality doctrine. That's the equality doctrine right there. And that's the flattening of the world. Because if we're all equal, the world is flat.
Not all Protestants are averse to dressing up. I mean, the black churches dress up.
Yeah, but that's really not the point.
Not all Protestants.
Right.
Isn't that
there are exceptions
the definition
to the rule.
of Protestants? It's like the woke. Like they say define CRT, and you say give them a definition, and they're like, that's not CRT. It's the same thing with Protestants. You give them a definition of Protestants, they're like, that's not Protestant.
Yeah, you can always find an exception.
Sorry, Jonathan. I'm kind of joking, but I'm kind of not.
Well, even at the Reform, people dress up. Maybe not anymore, but they used to.
Oh, Reform Judaism?
No. Reform Christians. CRC, RCA, Calvinists dress up. Baptists are more schlubs for sure.
It's just, I mean, like
I don't know.
Not all Baptists.
It's so
yeah,
hard.
You're right. Sorry, Mark. Yeah, up here they are.
That's the problem.
Pin that stuff down. It's so hard to pin. Yeah. Like my.
I went to a church with Trey today, and we didn't know what kind of church it was, and it's a long story. I don't know how I ended up in this church, but I'm like looking at their website. I'm trying to figure out like what their beliefs are, and like I can't find anything. Nothing on their website whatsoever. It's a huge church. Nothing on their website. And like, I start talking to people there, and they're like, no, we're just a Christian church. We're non-denominational. We have
just a
no
mega
like,
church.
we just believe what the Bible believes.
The
And it's
vanilla
like,
mega church.
and so I started asking, well, do you baptize children or adults? And he's like, we do both. I'm like, oh, so you do baptize children. Tech. So
Oh my goodness.
stop with the bullshit non-denomination.
That reminds me of the two worst church names I've seen driving around town.
Which is?
Well, one is a mega church called the Love Corner because it's on the corner of a block. And the other one is actually worse. It's the Friendship Lutheran Church of Joy.
I think Livingstone is one of the
I
dumbest
saw
church names
it
I've
driving
ever heard.
out. I passed by it driving out to St. Louis, and I literally had to stop and do a double take as I was driving.
Picture it didn't happen, Emma. We don't believe you.
I'm going to St. Louis this weekend again. I'll take a picture.
Andrew, what happened to your hair?
Yeah, it got butchered. Yep.
Like, all the highlights are gone.
Yeah, kinda.
Was that in exchange for the keeping the tattoo?
Yeah, no.
He's on his way to monastic life.
Yeah.
No, he is not. His father would absolutely
lose
die.
his mind. Yeah.
Yeah, but didn't Jesus say
And
you have
my
to
mother.
stab your father to enter the kingdom of heaven or something?
You have to stab your father? What?
So Andrew's father, apparently Andrew's father, the only reason he like believes in Christianity at all is like that's to raise kids, right? And then he like sees his kid because like I'm guessing he wanted his kid not to end up like these crazy people who are like cutting their own balls off, and now his kid's like going into a monastic thing. And basically cutting his own balls off.
Yeah, things are funny.
I was very impressed by Father Eric's response to when I said I cannot think of a more immoral lifestyle in Judaism than voluntary chastity.
What did he say?
Nothing. He's a Christian.
It's the right response, actually.
I'm sure he did not agree. Although at the same time, he also I don't think he thinks of his chastity as voluntary.
Interesting.
No,
I mean,
voluntary celibacy. Sorry, not chastity.
I was about to say, could you
chastity
please
is
say
definitely-
celibacy?
Everyone's called to chastity.
Yes. But celibacy.
Celibacy. Interesting. Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to hear what he thinks about that. I mean, Jacob, I mean, that does strike me as one of those differences, at least in focus, between like when you end up in the church, is that like there's this movement towards how would I say this? It's not, I mean, obviously, like it's not, the church is not viewed as a nation in the way that the nation of Israel is viewed as a nation. And so there's a sense in which the spread of the church is done differently than the spread of the nation of Israel through the earth.
Right, but the Shakers are still all dead.
Yeah, well, that's because they said everyone's got to be celibate. Mm-hmm. It's very different than saying there's a role for celibates in the church. You know?
Exactly.
There's a role for celibates in the synagogue, like people that are unfortunate and like can't have kids. There are many people who don't have kids who are holy and good Jews. Like that, I think that's what Jesus was actually saying, which is what Christians having no Jewish context, where the question is like, does a person who doesn't have children have any portion in the world to come or not? And there were certainly people who were like, nope, you're accursed of God. You have no children. You're nothing. And like rabbinic Judaism, including Jesus, was like, no, that's not true. It's possible even without children. It is possible even without children to be an okay person and and do God's will in the world. And Christianity flipped it and said, oh, even if you have children, you can also get into the and it's like the absolute opposite of biblical morality.
Jacob, you know how like online people say things and then like, you know, you're talking about Anselman, right? And you have to kind of like nudge them.
Okay, so what I always say about Anselman is sometimes some people say things so stupid on the internet that everyone else is like, okay, we need to like, this guy's not worth my time, and they go away and do something else. And so, like, especially in text, that's why I'm like, no, when someone says something that stupid, I say, wow, this is so stupid, I'm not even going to bother to answer you. And it's quite possible that I am actually saying things which are so stupid, they're not worthy of an answer. That's possible. If that is the case, you really should tell me, Jacob, what you just said is so stupid.
Well, you know, I thought I would do it by a somewhat coy reference to Anselman, but it seems that that's out the window now.
No, I kind of got that. That's why I explained it, but I don't think that's first of all, I'm not sure that's your opinion, because for somebody who says things that are so stupid, you don't even want to bother to. You sure do listen to what I say a lot.
Yep.
And second, I don't actually get the impression that people like stop saying things when I say things because they think I'm that stupid. That's not the impression I generally get. And this is the difference between false humility and actual humility. False humility would be me, like, and actually it's funny, like, this may have been last week's portion, the Torah portion, but it's the story of Moses and Korah, right? Moses says to Korah, like Korah comes and says to Moses, everybody's holy. Like, why are you and your brother like making yourself greater than everybody else? And Moses, who is the humblest man on earth, his response is, Rav lachem b'nei Levi. He says, no, I'm better than you. The Bible literally calls him the most humble man on earth, and his response to Korah is, no, I'm better than you, and God is going to show that. And God does.
But Moses still prayed.
I would be able to take over, Mark would be able to take over, and Jonathan would be able to take over. So if you need to go, go.
Yeah, I'm afraid that I have to step out. I'm going to do that. So, Jonathan or Mark, either of you guys, I'm going to let you
We're
guys.
all here.
Thank you all for
right.
showing up. It's
Thank
lovely.
Good to see you, Ted.
You make
Have a
it
good
what
week.
it is. You make it what it is. I'll try to. Thank you. Night, y'all.
Be everything.
Right.
So Chad says, I'm interested in how I best move forward in life if I don't reproduce. It's been in my mind. There's lots of things you can do if you don't reproduce. You can be a master tiler like you are, like being that's huge. You can be one of the teachers in Michael Sartori's Tecton School, which the more I know about it, the more I believe it may be the most blessed thing this entire this little corner has. That Tecton school may be the greatest idea that has come out of this little corner, and you have a capacity to be a teacher in that Tecton school. You have in Alcoholics Anonymous, you are contributing to people's lives. So Chad, it's like, I'm not joking when I say I want to be Chad the alcoholic when I grow up. Like, I am joking, but I'm not joking, because I do want to be Chad the alcoholic when I grow up. That doesn't mean I agree with everything you say, but it means that there's a wisdom in how I see you living your life, which I think is beautiful and I respect immensely. And you're a saint in my life. There's I was trying to think, since COVID destroyed my insurance business, I was trying to think, okay, what do I do next? And that the reason I chose to start with a substance abuse therapy class was because I want to be Chad the alcoholic when I grow up, because I think you do beautiful things in the world, Chad. So yeah, don't let that get to your head, though, because as I said to you before, last time I wanted you not to let it get to your head. The most important thing you ever did to get you where you are was drink a lot. And that wasn't the best idea in the world. But guess what? God has turned what was evil in your life into an incredible blessing in your life. And that's what God does, because God has the capacity to do that, to take all of our mistakes and turn it into wisdom. That's what repentance is. Taking your mistakes and turning it into wisdom. You're literally, like, it's alchemy. You're taking lead and you're turning it into gold through repentance. You take your sins and you turn them into good things in the world. You turn it into wisdom. That's repentance. It's the most miraculous thing you can do. I've been thinking about what?
Whoever hated lead, man. Why did lead get this bad rap?
Have you looked at the statistics about since we started getting lead out of the environment? Like, it may be the greatest thing in human history. Like, getting lead out of the environment has reduced murders, crime, like all kinds of things in ways that are just like absolutely phenomenal. I've just been thinking about how an entire bloodline will die with me. It's quite heavy. Yes and no, but that's the difference between humans. We don't just have our physical, we also have our spiritual children. So yeah, I don't think I am going to have children. But when people tell me, look, honestly, like, Antonio would not have had that kid if I hadn't spent all this time chewing his head off about being a Noahide and having a kid. And so, like, is that kid in some way my kid? Not actually, but like it's all I have in the world. And yes, that's why I keep on telling Andrew, you need to have like dozens of children. Dozens. And is it disrespectful to all those that came before me? Look, I don't believe in voluntarily not having children. But some people, like, it is not what I want that I am not married and don't have children. It is
Not
where
entirely
God,
up to you.
What?
It's not entirely up to the individual, right?
Yeah.
That's the issue.
Do everything you can to help raise children anyways. It's not the bloodline, it's the light in your heart. It's bigger than blood and soil. Yes. Very kind. Thank you. The Sorcerer's Stone. Okay, gotta go. Night night. We'll listen tomorrow. I think I am going to go as well. It was nice meeting all of you guys.
Good to see you.
Jonathan, what did you have? You jumped in and didn't say much.
Yeah, I mean, I just thought I would come hang out, see what was going on. What was the conversation going like before I joined?
Yeah, it was mostly Ted and I talking about Barfield and reality,
Lots of
nature
back and
things.
Barfield. I'm not familiar with Barfield.
Nor am I. I don't think such things are necessary. So, but there's a Barfield club on BOM that is trying to infect the world with Barfieldian ideas.
The BOM server is it's too busy. I can't.
It's quite chaotic. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure if I can handle that level.
Especially now. Yeah. Well, they spread out. They were on, like, Sherry and some other folks were on the Vervaeke server for a while saying, this is all Barfield. And we're like, well, maybe, but also Vervaeke's formula is a little bit better for us folk here, right? Since we were all visiting Vervaeke and nobody was going to go out and read Barfield just to understand Vervaeke's point in a less rich way, right? Which is basically, that's what I was getting at was, well, this Barfield thing is nice, but it's very flat. And actually, Vervaeke's going to
forgot to ask Ted about his paintings.
Mark, did you go to Chino or no?
No, I didn't go to Chino.
Okay. Have
I was in Thunder Bay.
You went to Thunder Bay. Okay.
What about you, Jonathan?
I did not go to Chino. I am a family man with young kids, so it's trickier for me to get away. I also live in the Midwest, so going out to California is a bit of a hike.
What general part?
I'm in Grand Rapids, the mecca of the CRC.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
You could have gone to Thunder Bay, dude. Come on.
No, I don't think I was up on the corner when Thunder Bay existed. I'm
really?
relatively new.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. I mean, that was like what, about a year ago?
It was September.
Yeah, I don't think I like reached out to Jacob and like until around January, kind of this Discord. Started listening to, I mean, PVK. I kind of started listening to a little over a year ago. But yeah, it's been kind of more accelerated over the past 6 months or so. Thunder Bay is still a bit of a drive because I got to go around to the whole lake.
Yeah.
I drove around the whole. I drove from South Carolina to Southwest South Dakota. Stayed there for a few days, hung out with Sally Joe, got the little books, and then drove and picked Ethan up at Minneapolis. Did the Thunder Bay thing, right? And then drove north around the lake and then came back home that way. And it was absolutely gorgeous. I was like, what a great, I didn't plan it out that way. It was sort of last minute. And I was sick, but it didn't even matter. Even though I had a cold, I really enjoyed the drive back. So I got to drive all the way around Lake Superior on the north side.
I'm sure it's quite the beautiful adventure.
Oh yeah. The geology is amazing. It's boring because it doesn't change, but it's amazing to see the rocks up there. And boy, you got to be careful in that part of Canada because there ain't nothing, and I mean nothing. Like it's like the Midwest, only colder with rocks everywhere instead of fields. It's like whoa.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I played in a band that we played a show up at Michigan Tech in Houghton, Michigan.
Oh boy.
So you're at the very tip of the UP. And there's a point where the highway just turns into kind of like it's barely paved with just like the pine trees on either side, and it just changes completely. There's like this very dense wooded area, and your cell phone signal goes away for about 45 minutes before you get into the town, and it kind of feels like Twin Peaks up there.
I bet
the UP is beautiful.
Yeah, Yeah, well, I'm a troll, so I mean, I'm not only do I live in the Lower Peninsula, I live like in the southern part of the Lower Peninsula. So
I mean, I was born in Ann Arbor, so
okay. And Emma, do you what state do you live in now? Illinois?
I'm in
you said?
Illinois now.
Okay, but you went to Hillsdale.
I did.
Yeah, some Michigan.
I've
living.
spent a lot of time in Michigan.
Yeah.
My parents live there again now. They moved back after I started college.
Yeah.
So actually my whole family is in Ann Arbor except for me, which is a little sad.
Are you down by Champaign-Urbana?
Yeah, that's where I am.
Okay, school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I lived in Chicago for a while, and I knew some folks lots of UIUC
nice.
folks that live in Chicago or around there.
Oh yeah. Makes sense.
Yeah. So, what's the next? I guess Israel's the next
Next conference.
planned conference. So I don't know. We'll see.
That'll be
Okay.
interesting.
No, there's something in DC. So I don't know. What
Oh,
that's about.
is that?
Oh yeah, I don't know how much that counts as a I feel like people are divided on how much that counts as a TLC conference though.
I'm still, so Vanderklay posted the Grim Grizz conversation with Justin Wells and saying like, oh, this is the best description of TLC yet. And I listened to the whole thing and I'm like, what, where? Because I didn't hear it.
I started listening to it and it seemed like really not on track and for that. And I'm like,
I'm sorry, did I not say
do I
Grim
finish
Grizz?
it? No, you did.
Oh, okay.
Okay, fair. That's fair. But there was nothing in the first like half or so of it that made me think that PVK's description was forthcoming.
I might write him an email and say, dude, I don't do this to you. Why are you doing this to me? Like, come on. And I listened to it at double speed because I was like, I have a hard time believing that Justin or Grim has a concise,
really
articulable
coherent
conception. So
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, who does have a good?
I don't think there is one. Like, I don't think there's a there. I know everybody thinks there's a there, and I'm like, I'm not seeing a there. I'm sorry, guys. And I could be wrong, but like, look,
Well, it's a mosaic, right? Like it's at this point, it's just a mosaic.
But that's emergence is good. That's not a thing. It's not bad. Like everyone's like, well, I think they all want to have a thing, and they don't. And so they're like, no, it's definitely a thing. And it's like, I think you want it to be a thing, but you don't know what that thing is, and so you can't have it because you don't even know what it is. But
so my question is, do you not think it's a thing yet, or do you not think it's a thing?
No freaking way, no chance at all, zero chance. Well, they just refuse to cohere. I mean, you've heard it before. Like, we're afraid that everyone's all upset because I'm an admin on the StreamYard, and we don't want Mark leading your organization, Jacob. And Jacob was like, Mark, it doesn't meet any of the criteria, but and then we don't want that person to lead your organization either. And we don't like, okay, but if you don't want a leader, you're not going to have a body, and if you don't want a body, you're not going to have a thing. And it's just that simple. And they don't. They're rebels, so they don't want it, which is fine. But also admit that you don't want it and move on. Right?
I think that's good, Tim. If you can explain it to my wife, you're onto something. I'm in the same camp.
Yeah.
She thinks it's just a bunch of Jews. I'm like, it's not that many Jews, to be honest.
Not that many.
Not that many. Yeah, it's certainly a loose affiliation of people. It's like
well, it's groups that are talking. I mean, I think Justin actually had it right in the conversation with Graham, where he said there's different camps. Okay, the camps are a thing for sure. There's a Vervaeke camp. Although how coherent that is
what's the most analogous
very
to?
open question.
Is it more like is it like Reddit with different /r/PVK/r/Jacob?
I don't think so, because Reddit in the purest sense really is like a platform, which is, we'll say, a filter for people who are doing textual conversations. It's forums.
Yeah.
It's the old forum, which is fine, but like there isn't an ethos behind Reddit. it doesn't exist, right? It's just a bunch of things that can be done that are being done. Like, oh, yeah, fair enough. It's sort of like farms, right? Okay, there are farms, and different farms do different things, but they're all doing farming. But are they? Is it? It's
Is
just one
this
of those
more?
things.
You know what it
This
is?
is more
It's
coherent.
ancient Greece.
It's ancient Greece city-states. There's four
It's a
city-states
bunch
in
of
some
city states which all have their own like rules and practices,
Yeah.
but kind of have a shared language and culture that lets them interact more closely than they do with anything else.
Yeah, but
Well, I don't think it's a shared language and culture, even, Emma. I would say it's just a willingness to have a conversation because they all believe the conversation is some kind of answer, and I think that's actually dead wrong.
I don't believe that either. But yet here we are still, Mark, like part of the conversation. Like I think there's people who have that conversational focus, but it's beyond just those folks too.
Right. Well, but there's people that can do it. Like this is the other problem. Like because you don't believe in hierarchy for real or not taking it seriously enough. Some people can have conversations and some people actually can't. Right.
Yeah.
And some people have really good conversations. Some people have okay conversations. Some people have really chaotic conversations. There's nothing wrong with any of that. I'm not judging it. I'm saying that it's not equivalent though. And that's actually important because different types of conversations have different utility and different qualities. And if you want something to be a thing, that's fine. And maybe you can have all those types of conversations. But this is, I was asking Jacob on Twitter earlier today because he's like, oh, there's at least 10 billion people willing to listen to our little corner, and I'm like, where are you getting these numbers? Bad data science. I'm like, no, it's bad data science. That's something I actually know about, right?
Yeah.
Where you're getting the numbers from, because there's a lot more people that are ready, willing, and able to listen, as with anything else, than there are people that are able to have conversations for people to listen to. And that's just an asymmetry of the universe. And it's hard to measure because the participation level of somebody receiving something is obviously hard to know, right? Unless you're aggregating over different platforms and getting rid of duplicate data, because a lot of the people that will say almost all the Vervaeke people have listened to some Peterson, right? Whereas not all the Peterson people know anything about Vervaeke. How do you account for that when you're counting channel numbers, right? Or the case that I made to Paul in the last conversation that I did with him in a live stream, where I said, I don't think the biblical lectures is actually his most watched stuff if you count unique viewers. I think that if you take out the Maps of Meaning folks, the biblical lecture series is less watched than Maps of Meaning. And that's indicated in the data. I can't swear to that because it's not actually possible. I would need the actual data from his channel, right? But the indication and the normal pattern for these things is that all the Maps of Meaning people, or nearly all of them, watch the biblical lecture series. And when you subtract out those numbers, there aren't that many, we'll say, crisis of faith people that are watching Peterson, but there's a hell of a lot of meaning crisis people watching Peterson.
Right.
Yeah. And those are distinct phenomenon for sure.
Well, thank you. I think so. That was another point of my, I've made videos on that before, in a couple of forums. Yeah.
I
feel like you can be in both at the same time.
There's an overlap.
Which would make them distinct phenomenon.
Well, you get pulled into
because otherwise you're just experiencing one thing.
Well, you forget the symbolism. That's the crisis of faith people. But the meaning crisis people never had it. And so, if you had it before and you just need to remember it, that's one set of solutions. But if you never had it, that set of solutions isn't going to work.
Yeah.
That's where Peterson shines, because he actually makes the case, like what he does effectively. And I do have videos on this on my channel, right? But what he does effectively, he smashes up against the limits of materiality and says, here's your beautiful materiality, and here are the pieces. And now let me show you what you can do to fix these problems that materiality either creates or is unable to resolve, right? And then that's how he gets you into it.
Yeah, we're like the Jordan Peterson breakout groups.
Well, that's the best way to think about it too, and I think I forget who mentioned this, but a couple of people have mentioned this over the past like half a year or so. There's a flavor to Jordan Peterson meetup groups that doesn't exist in the attempts to refine that, like estuary, etc. Somebody said explicitly about estuary, and I was like, whoa, well, I'm not going to say that, but I'm glad you did, because yeah, I got that sense very much, even though I've only really participated or semi-participated in one estuary event. I was just like, well, you know, I still support people doing things, so that's great, but it's not the same as the stuff I've heard from the people who attended, say, the original Sacramento meetup groups around Jordan Peterson, or some of the other people who had meetup groups around Peterson or whatnot. It's just not the same thing.
Yeah. It feels like this is kind of a post-Peterson community at this point. Not
Well,
like it's, or like it's now become its own thing. It's not as much focused around Peterson and what he's doing. Although I think like watching like the old Maps and Meaning lectures, it was like, you know, everyone had a tier, right? You know, it was very like, it's like that's the good stuff. That's the stuff that we.
Ted brought that up earlier, right? And I think, yeah, Peterson definitely changed, but he's trying to expand his audience, and maybe that's a good thing to do, is to leave his old audience behind, because he's imparted everything to them that they need, right? Whether he could impart more or not is not the issue. The issue is, do you have everything you need to move forward? Because then he should move to a new audience once he's filled the needs of the previous audience. But also, he is trying to operate at a different level, because the urgency of the pattern he's following has increased. Whatever you may think of that pattern is kind of irrelevant. And people are asking me all the time, right? Like, well, what's going on? And, you know, like this week, like this past 7 days, oh no, like everything, I was talking about speeding up like 8 days ago, and then all of a sudden everything just went into freaking hyperdrive, and like Canada's having problems paying things, and I have all kinds of billing problems all of a sudden with vendor. And I'm like, if you can't bill, you can't be in business. It's really that. And accounting is so simple. You really shouldn't be doing it with a computer, because you're wasting the computer's power on something as simple as like writing down credits and debits, which really doesn't require a computer, right? And now you're making it prone to error, right? And in one case, I had a whole vendor, their platform went down. And so they told me I paid something that I didn't pay. And it took them a week and a half to tell me that. And then I had to stop and check everything and make sure they were right, because who knows, maybe someone got paid and that money's gone. Now I have to go through and do a bunch of accounting to make sure that wasn't the case. But so it's like this knock-on effect from, well, you couldn't just use a piece of paper and a pencil to fix the problem. And now, you know, you went a week and a half without your money and nobody noted. And now there's all these knock-on effects because things weren't paid, and it's crazy, right? So it's not good, the acceleration. And Peterson's addressing that, or trying to, right? He's switched his focus from local, like, and again, you have all the tools. You have the future authoring program, right? And that. So now he's just focused at a different layer of analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. We like Peterson before he signed to the big label. We liked your first albums, like, you know, before you went electric. Like that's kind of
not me. I still like most of his stuff. So
sure. But like,
have you watched the Exodus seminar?
Who are you asking?
Mark. I
watched the first one, and I'm behind. I wanted to catch up.
Okay.
I watched the whole first one. I haven't finished the second set there.
Okay, I'm on like the 4th or 5th episode, and really, I'm just really curious about what happens when Larry Arnn shows up.
Yeah, the thing with that is there's so many good nuggets in there, and one of the things that I really like about that series is that Dennis Prager does the right thing and says, wow, you know, I've heard this argument for years and I never understood it until you said something, Jonathan or Jordan or whatever, right? Or I've heard that argument before, but you really, you know, nailed it. And it's that idea of giving credit when people are right. And that's one of the things that people don't do for Peterson very often. Like in the last Peterson Vervaeke Pageau talk, I thought that like he really deserved a lot of credit for nailing a really good definition of evil, which coincidentally just happens to match mine. One of these days I got to get in front of Peterson and say, how much of this stuff, and I have a list of stuff, did you pick up when you were at Harvard? Because I used to hang out on Harvard campus, around that time, we'll say, maybe not when he was there, but like I'm New England, like I grew up in Massachusetts,
Right.
and I lived in Boston, and I used to walk down to Harvard Square every night and write poetry and do all kinds of weird things. But I'm steeped in all this New England language and colloquialisms and devil take the hindmost. I'm like, oh, I know that, and fair enough. Yep, I've been using that my whole life. So I want to know if he got that
Wait,
from Canada,
really?
which he might have, or if he got it from Harvard.
Now I have to like reassess all my speech patterns. Thanks.
No problem.
I almost
fair enough is a northeastern
Is it?
thing. I don't know. I'm asking
I
you.
mean, I don't know either. That's why I want to find out from him. I'm like, is that regional? Because when you get down south, for example, from New England, and I had always knew that I should be down here and not up there for whatever reason, but like all the little things change. There's usage of words that, like, I've told the story before, but I was going to the airport once, getting dropped off because I was taking a one-way trip, and I get on this airport van, and this woman starts talking about service. And the minute she used the word service, my brain went, she is using this word in a way you do not understand. And I was like, whoa, because my vocabulary doesn't suck. I think that's fair to say, like, at all. So just like, there's a use of this word that I'm just not familiar enough with I'm familiar enough with what she's saying to know that she's using that word in a way I'm not used to hearing it used. And I was just like blown away. And I totally got what she was saying. And she talked about the first time she learned about service when she was 12 years old. And her parent, they lived on the panhandle of Florida, and there was a hurricane. I forget which one. Maybe she didn't even mention the name. It doesn't matter. And they fixed the house they lived in last. And the first houses they fixed were the houses they were renting to others. And the second houses they fixed were their neighbors' houses. And the last houses they fixed were their houses. Now, the thing about that story is, if you listen closely, they're not poor because they own 3 houses at least. So they're not poor. So the people they're helping are their renters first, and then the community second, right? And so you hear the hierarchy of responsibility in the upper class, effectively. How upper, I don't know. I don't care. It doesn't matter.
Sure.
Like,
Yeah.
there's definitely a hierarchy there, and the highest is kneeling to the lowest, right? And then they're kneeling to the community before taking care of themselves. And I was just like, and I'm practically in tears now just thinking about it, because it was such a beautiful, clear illustration, because that was her example for how she learned about service. And it's like, talk about washing the feet, man. Because right, it's right there, and it's just like so beautiful and so poignant and so visceral, right? And it's all participation. Like, she didn't say, I learned about service because when I went to Bible school, and then after I went to Bible school, we had a discussion, and it wasn't propositional. It was all like, my parents dragged me away when I was 12 out of my broken house to somebody else's broken house to fix their broken house first. And then we didn't go right back to my house to fix it. We went to some of the neighbors' houses and fixed their houses, right? And then we went back to our house and fixed our house last. And that's what taught me about service. And it's like, oh, wow, okay. That's as clear as day. Now I understand service better, right? You don't actually understand it until you actually do it, participatory knowledge. But yeah, that for me was very poignant and powerful. But that's the sort of thing I never heard in all my years in New England. And I was like, wow, that's, not that I hadn't heard things about service, right? But it didn't have that flavor. The method of the story was totally different. The word just didn't have that same meaning at all.
That's interesting.
I thought, because again, it's like, my vocabulary doesn't suck at all. But it's so, to me, to run across a word where I'm like, oh, you're using that word in a way that I'm just not familiar with. That always, it's always
weird.
A pleasant uncovering of my ignorance. I'm always happy because I'm like, ooh, something new to learn. I'm about to learn something new, right? It's very exciting for me because I like to learn. But yeah, it's very important to sort of notice that when people are, that's why my channel is about, how are people actually using these words anyway, because that's what's fascinating to me, not what the definitions are in the dictionary or any of that stuff, but what people are actually trying to convey in their use.
Oh, so are you a descriptive linguistics rather than prescriptive linguistics person?
No, I think they're both bad frames. Actually, I just look at that stuff and I'm like, why were you thinking about language that way? What's wrong with you?
What's the alternative? What's an alternative frame?
An alternative frame is realizing that language is unimportant. What's important is communication, and there are many forms of communication. And so the minute you understand, like this always blows my mind. I don't, I'm trying not to be condescending about it, but if I come across that way, like I try to explain to people, sarcasm is literally or physically correspondent to flipping the meaning, the actual meaning of the same set of words said differently. And by said, it's not a change in language, it's a change in tone. That doesn't fit within the category of language that we normally use. And
Sure,
so
Mark.
it's the form of exactly. It's the form of communication, right? And so there's more than words for communication. There's also tone. There's more than words and tone for communication. There's also movement, right? And there's more than that because there's all this nuance to this body language, right? And so when you focus in on such a tiny part of communication and start to use that to understand something in the world like communication, you fail immediately because it's too limiting. It's too limiting a frame because there really are just down to propositions. That's why I like Vervaeke's system a lot, even though we've modified it from types of knowing to types of information and changed it up a little.
So you're descriptive.
No, a description doesn't capture anything, and description's important and required, but it's so insufficient that it's not.
Well, I feel like my sense is that if you're not a proscriptive language person, descriptive is the catch-all for anything else.
Right, and that's a bad frame because it's a binary frame, and I don't believe binary frames are useful. It's low resolution.
Well, it's sort of like it's not strictly binary. It's sort of like one of them is like.
Well, if not A, then B is a binary formulation.
Well, it's more like if not A, then not A.
Well, but then you can't pin me down to descriptive. You can pin me down to not prescriptive or something. Or
Sure. Okay. Well, it just, to me, descriptive kind of is like everything kind of falls under descriptive by default. Because
I don't think it does. I mean, I think that's the poverty of what's going on. Like, it's easy to listen to Jordan Hall and go, "Ooh, he sounds really smart," but he's not saying anything. He's giving you descriptions, but they're not useful descriptions. So who cares? Like, it's gobbledygook at some point.
Emma, do you see what I'm trying to say here?
Kind of.
Like,
it's like
there's absolute versus relative. Right. And like so if you're not absolute, you're relative. And if you're relative, then anything goes.
No, you need both. That's the problem. It's not.
I do know that one of Mark's whole things is like fight the binaries. So I don't think you're like getting anywhere with this one.
I guess I wouldn't position it as a binary, but it's fine. Like I'll concede to Mark's.
Yeah, I think whenever you try to put something in two categories, you're already falling prey to low resolution picture. And I don't think there are two categories. I don't see things with two opposing categories where they're perfectly opposed. And because of that, you reenchant the world because now all of a sudden you're not stuck with, left versus right or Democrat versus Republican or any of that. It clearly doesn't map to the world. Like, just observe. And the map fails almost immediately. And it's like, it's not an invalid description. It is descriptive of something, but is it descriptive enough to be useful? No, it's not, especially now. And you can make the argument that conservative versus liberal was a more useful way to think about the world, say 30 years ago or something, or 40 years ago, whatever. You can make that argument, and that's not an invalid argument, but I would argue it was never a high enough resolution picture to really understand anything important.
So then, Mark, I'm curious in that vein, jumping over to the Randos United chat, is male female a useful binary frame?
No, it's not a binary. Like this is Jacob's earlier point about the smallest level of analysis for individualism, which I wouldn't characterize as individualism. I don't know why he's so in love with that word, but a lot of people are, right? So the smallest form of person, we'll say, is both together, right? And if they can be together, then they're not binaries, obviously, because binaries are exclusive. They're not male and female are not exclusive categories. And then the follow-on question: so wouldn't trans have a point about gender? No, they don't have any points. They're in their heads, and they're little fantasy people, and there's only 4 of them, and you can ignore 4 people just fine, and everything will be fine. Like this obsession with worrying about tiny percentages of the population really has to end, because when you try to fit in every exception, all you get is more chaos, doom, and destruction. And
it's Jonathan Pageau's leaving the edges of the field.
Right. You have to have an edge to the field. What is this obsession with making it all grow, like, grow or cultivated is the better way to, actually, that's exactly the right way to think about it. Cultivated. You don't cultivate the whole thing, right? Like you don't have to, and you shouldn't, right? And then that's that's the problem. And David says again, right, as in their effectiveness of spreading ideology because they exploit the truth. No, they don't exploit the truth. They pervert the truth. And it's not a false-ish binary. It's not a binary. It's not anything like a binary. And that's the problem, is that the fact that you can put something in a binary does not make you smart. It makes you 3 years old. And that's not to say there's nothing to it, because we all were 3 years old and needed to be 3 years old. And we need those framings, right, for certain things. It's just that you can't use them in the world to understand it very well.
What's your word for opponent processing?
Cooperative processing. We don't oppose ourselves. That's an absurd idea. Yeah, we're not in opposition with ourselves, and we're not in opposition with it. And that is it's ironic, right? That is the difference between debate and dialogos, or dialectic more properly. But the idea that you and the other person can become better when you exhaust yourself by bashing into each other is absurd. You can do this physically and find that out, right? Or you can, I don't know Tai Chi, but you can practice martial arts together. And after a good session of martial arts, because you're not in opposition, why are you not in opposition? Because basically, even when you're sparring in martial arts, at least the way I was taught, you didn't try to knock the other guy out. It was supposed to be light touch on purpose, right? And nobody was scoring hits. Which is not to say you weren't being scored, but nobody, like if I punched the other guy 3 times, I did not do better because I punched the other guy 3 times. That didn't happen. So for example, if I punch the other guy 3 times, and especially with me, because I have fast twitch nerve fibers, so I'm actually really quick, at least when I'm not sick. I'm very fast, way below the bell curve fast. If I hit somebody, basically while they were wide open and they were weak when they were wide open, my sensei gave me 0 points for all of that. It just didn't count because it wasn't hard. He only scored me when I did something that was outside of what I could normally do, which is the proper way to educate. I have a video on education versus training, right? So that's the proper way.
I need to watch that one.
So that's actually, you should. Yep, absolutely. Can confirm you need to watch that one. But that's the proper way to do that in martial arts. So when you're doing martial arts properly, you're not in opposition. You start out with a bow. You bow to the sensei. You bow to each other, right? It's all about respect because he's not your opponent. And what do you do at the end? You bow. And then what do? You give in your scores. And my score and the score of the other person are not equatable because I was being scored on how many things I did that I wouldn't normally do or something, right? And he was being scored on that same measure, but those 2 measures aren't the same, so they're not comparable. So there's 0 opposition. We're both learning. That's cooperation. That's not opposition. we weren't opposing each other in any reasonable fashion. That's why I look at how people use words and what they're saying about them, rather than taking them at, oh, well, you mean opposition. He doesn't mean opposition. That's not what he's describing. Hey, Hezzy. It's good to see you, Hezzy.
Mark, do you do data science in your civilian life?
Among other things, yeah. I'm a software engineer and a software architect and a systems architect, right? Or senior DevOps engineer, right?
Okay.
But yeah, I do a lot of data science and AI. And ChatGPT is no threat to us, believe me.
Sure.
It wrote some great stuff for me today. I was like, oh, this is great. Like, it just whipped out some code. I'm like, oh, it was all scripting. It wasn't real programming. The real programming stuff, it cannot do. So,
do you find that you have to, like, how typical is it for you to come into a data science situation, like you're hired by a company or whatever, and like you end up having to do a ton of data engineering before you can actually do any
That's what
sort of
data science is. That's
It's-
what
you
it
think
is. So, like, yeah, the reason why you have nothing to fear from AI is because it's still garbage in, garbage out. And if
Yeah.
you don't know data science, you can't actually do AI to any reasonable effect. And that's I've been running over the past week or so. I've been running tests with ChatGPT to see, because everyone's like, I can do this and it can do that, and I'm like, it absolutely can't. And I can tell you where the errors are and why they're there. And they're stupid errors that you can, and tools have been written in the past that do better at certain types of errors than the AI does. And they've been around for 40 years. And some, like C-Scope's been around forever. And C-Scope does a way better job at the sort of errors I was deliberately inducing in the code to test. Well, I wasn't inducing. ChatGPT was writing bad code, and I was trying to encourage it to fix it in the right way. And there was no set of prompts that could get it to understand scope.
Yep.
Which is pretty basic to fixing software. So,
yeah.
But yeah, if you don't have the right data in, and you don't control the data in on ChatGPT, and it's not in the right format, then the answers you get will be broken. Some of that you can fix with prompt engineering or with tuning, which I haven't played with, but I know what they're doing there. So I'm like, oh, okay, I see what they're doing there.
Mm-hmm.
But there are super huge limits on that. Like, the constraints on that are much larger than you realize. So even very simple tasks. So one of the early tasks I gave it a couple months ago was, I said, get me 100 quotes on wisdom. And it couldn't do it. And I was like, I could write a non-AI piece of software to do that. And it would do a better job than what ChatGPT did. So, this AI stuff is very overblown.
Yeah. Yeah. Did it give you 100 things?
No, it didn't even get that. No, it didn't get that far. I think I got it to 7 and 12 and 15, and it couldn't even give me 100 items. And I was like, what is wrong with you, dude? And, and I was trying to get it 365 for obvious reasons. Because, people were claiming like, oh, you could do a calendar. And I was like, all right, what kind of, I would do a wisdom calendar. What would that look like? And so I started at 365 and realized, oh, it really can't handle that. And interestingly, the larger number affects the answer. So as you get the number down to like 100, it actually gets further, which is a very weird result. But actually, if you know what's going on, you're not surprised by that result at all. But people who don't know data science would be like, that's counterintuitive. And I'm like, no, actually, if you know software engineering well enough, you know exactly why that is. It's a very common problem in software that's very well understood. There's whole books about it. Right, but you have to be an expert, and it's just something I've been doing my whole life. So I just happen to be an expert at it. That's all.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't make it not counterintuitive for normies, though.
Oh, right. No, exactly. Like I said, if you know, and this is the whole problem with everything. Like,
that's the dangerous part about, I think, ChatGPT is that normies don't know when it's totally off the rails,
or they don't, or they're impressed by small things. So like, look, it's impressive, and actually it did something quite impressive today, because I wanted
it can write a C paper.
Yeah, right. Well, but I had it write a whole thing to go. You know, it only works for the person that owns the YouTube channel. But I said, you know, I want all the info on all my videos in this format. And it went and wrote what I thought was an amazingly concise. I was like, wow, that's really concise. Like
Totally.
I'm a freak for that stuff. And I'm like, that's like, what is it? It's 104 lines of code. I was like, wow, it can strip the whole thing on 104 lines of code. That's really good. That's like next level stuff for scripting. I'm like, that's excellent scripting. And it had a few bugs, and I made a mistake at one point, but I corrected that, and then I had it fix another bug indirectly by saying, oh, give me a thing that just does this piece, and then I put it in that code, and that was very useful. I mean, I was like, oh wow, this is pretty cool, because I've been meaning to go and write that myself, but you know, geez, ChatGPT just did a bunch of code for me in no time. And that's very impressive until you realize that other very simple things that involve variable scoping, which is kind of key to any real software, it can't handle at all. It doesn't even understand the problem in any reasonable fashion.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Emma, how do you use ChatGPT in your day-to-day life now?
I do not. Well, I fight it.
Okay.
Fight the power.
Oppositional.
Students use it to do their homework for them.
Really? Okay.
And it's pretty obvious when they've used it to do their homework for them, but it's not always easy to prove. And also, sometimes they'll argue with you that that's not plagiarism.
That's fair.
So we're gonna have to figure that out, because we're gonna have to figure.
Right.
No,
if you
I
didn't do it, it's not yours. And that's the problem. You're claiming credit for something you didn't do, and you're being measured. The point of homework is to measure you, not ChatGPT. And therefore the plagiarism question to me is kind of orthogonal to that.
Oh, it's a dumb argument and a dumb question, but plagiarism is the language that the university has for
not
using something else to do your homework and not doing it yourself.
Yeah, not your work.
So
they did do it themselves.
No, yeah.
But it doesn't tell me anything about whether they read the reading, which is what the homework's really for. So
yeah.
Well, maybe you should find a better way to test.
We do need to find a better way to do that.
Yeah, you just need cattle prods and
oral exams.
Participatory.
Oral exams.
We're going that direction. It's going to happen in a lot more universities. I don't know if I will be able to pull that off like in my classes this semester, because I am also under a professor who has his own ideas of how bad this problem is and what should be done about it.
Yeah.
But that's a separate issue. But at least we're going to have to go back to like in-person, like timed essays and stuff, rather than like turn in a bigger essay that you've worked on for longer, which is, you know, fine.
I think it should just be an oral exam, just an interview. I mean, I like same way I feel about interviewing in my civilian professional life. Like, I'll have a conversation with somebody. I can figure out if they know what they're talking about.
Yeah,
I can ask the right questions and dig in. I need 30 minutes with somebody to basically know whether or not I should hire them. And I can't replicate it necessarily into a particular rubric.
It's not proceduralizable.
It's an art, not a science.
Right.
There are some rules of thumb. There are some, and of course it doesn't always work that way. So but what's frustrating is sometimes you could have somebody who could pass the oral exam, but fail on some of the rubrics of like the strict bureaucratic kind of process. And it's like, well, they didn't do that great on this like subjective guess what I'm thinking kind of process that we have. But like, I talked to them for half an hour. They can do the job, or they can't do the job. And I feel like that's probably how we need to grade in academics too.
Well, that's the re-enchantment that I was talking about, right? So people use the word nuance a lot. What do they mean? They actually mean re-enchantment. They mean like, no, this is more complicated
see
than this
that.
flat world, compressed, reduced, model.
I mean,
Yeah,
nuance is
the
a
issue
slippery
is
word.
when you're
too.
like, when you're fighting against the entire system by doing that. Because like the benefit of all the bureaucracy and rubrics is it protects TAs from accusations of capricious grading, which I actually got slammed with the first semester I was grading, except it turned out I didn't even grade that essay, the professor did, so the student really had no one to appeal to in that. He just sent me a very rude email. And when I forwarded it to the professor, he was like, I graded that essay. Why is he yelling at you? So it's just hard because you can't necessarily, like, if you can't necessarily rely on people to not just take the path of least resistance in a given situation.
Yeah, I mean, you need those structures, but at some point they get in the way, and if they're not revivified, I mean, this is another trick that Peterson does. He talks about revivification, and it's like, yeah, you have an obligation to save your father from the belly of the whale if you can, right? Or at least try, right? You have an obligation to revivify the culture and not just, be a zombie and a parasite on it and chew on the bones, right? And that's the problem, is that we've stultified a bunch of institutions for far too long and then gamed the system and allowed other people to do it and then bailed them out in 2008, for example, right? And now we've got a problem of moral hazard, and the moral hazard problem was real, and we chose wrong on that for sure. There's no question now, knowing what we know now about that. That was the bad choice. We should have let them fail and taken it on the chin, but we didn't.
Folks, head to bed. Good to talk.
Sounds good. Good to talk to you.
Yeah.
Do you
Thanks
do
for hopping in,
the Jacob's Book Club or Elijah's Book Club?
Yeah, I will hope to be there tomorrow.
All right.
I just have to read my chapter.
Yeah, same.
All right.
All right.
Night.
Thanks,
Night.
everybody. Have a great night. Thanks for joining.